a total of 350 gigawatt of flexible, dispatchable power plants, most of them running on hydrogen and renewable gases. Later this year, on the coast of Denmark in Kassel, European Energy's first-of-a-kind e-methanol production facility will come online. The site will use Siemens Energy electrolyzers to produce 6,000 tons of green hydrogen each year to support the industry and shipping needs, especially those where we have hard-to-abate industries. Hydrogen and its derivatives could represent almost 12% of final energy consumption by 2050. And it was wonderful to see 6 European hydrogen projects reach final investment decision in July. What we need now is the market demand, but also the regulatory environment to help the industry to take off. Renewable generation has a significant role to play in Europe's energy independency and energy affordability. Europe installed 3.7 gigawatt offshore wind in 2023, and nearly 90% of that offshore wind comes from either the North Sea or the Baltic Sea. Last year, a record-breaking 21% of Poland's electricity was produced by wind and solar. The country has increased its offshore wind targets from 10 gigawatt to 18 gigawatt by 2040 and focused on streamlining offshore wind auctions and permitting procedures. Almost 11 gigawatt of the capacity has already gone through bidding, so the likelihood that it will be realized is very high. Siemens Gamesa offshore wind turbines will spin at 3 of Poland's latest offshore wind projects, and combined, these projects should unlock 3 gigawatt of energy of the country. One project, Baltica 2 alone, will provide electricity to almost 2.4 million Polish homes. And there is no energy transition without transmission. Cross-border infrastructure investments in Europe needs to double by 2030 because there was a massive underinvestment into our grids over the last decades. In Europe, just to give you one example how complex this is, we have 40 transmission system operators and 27 national grid codes. And those national grid codes, they can be up to, in the specifications, up to 23,000 pages long. We managed to reduce them to 2,000 with one of our customers, which I think 2,000 pages, still a lot of paper to fill. So this simplifying the specification also needs to happen to speed up delivery. For every nation in Europe benefits from the wind speed in the North Sea, so we need the energy capabilities in each country to explore separately and to join the valuable power that each country generates. Joining our energy grids will be a very important thing in order to get this European energy market. As we make progress against net zero, the number of people needed to deliver the energy transition grows. According to LinkedIn, globally, we need to double the size of the green talent pool by 2050 and to keep the pace with the projected demand. 3.5 million new jobs in green energy will be created by 2030. So if you are not in the energy industry yet, this is a very good time to join now. So in summary, what do we need to deliver our net zero targets and boost our energy security? 3 main things. First, a connected European energy network. This would strengthen our collective energy security, help us use clean energy efficiently, and rationalize energy prices across the continent. Second, an acknowledgement of the diversity of our region. Each country has its own complex energy requirements, established infrastructure, and distinct national resources. We can't do all the same thing. And third, an appreciation of the scale of the transformation required to future-proof our established energy system. It relies on innovative technologies, policy commitments, financing, and the collective will to make the change happen fast. There is no one silver bullet. Time is of the essence, so let's not waste it. Looking forward to the discussion over the next 1.5 days. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, now we have a time for a ministerial panel discussion. The topic would be sharing common energy security vision, energy cooperation within CEE, Central and Eastern Europe, and allied countries. So the moderator would be Hedley Gamble, international journalist and presenter. Big applause for her. She's coming. The session is in partnership with International Visegrad Fund.
Good morning, everybody, and once again, welcome to the Warsaw Security Forum. I'm Hadley Gamble. I am the chief international anchor for Al Arabiya, as well as a contributor to Semaphore. I've been covering energy for the last 20 years, as well as national security, and I'm thrilled to be here and join all of you today. We're going to be talking about energy security within CEE countries. And I'd love to invite my panelists to join me here on the stage, and I think several of you are in the audience. The Minister of Energy from Romania, Sebastian Burjuja, is joining us. Good morning. The Secretary of State, as well as Minister for the Ministry of Climate and Environment here in Poland, Krzysztof Balista, is here as well. If I could have Krzysztof, thank you so much for joining us this morning. The State Secretary for International Affairs, European Integration and Digitization for the Ministry of Energy of Moldova is also here, Christina Pereticiu. Good morning. Tina van der Struyden, of course, the Minister of Energy from Belgium, is here on stage with me as well. And Albinas Zanavavicius, the Deputy Minister of Energy for Lithuania. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and good morning once again. Just as we kick off, I wanted to take a moment to get a sense from these ministers as to how they view energy security in Europe today. In the first days of the invasion of Ukraine, I was actually in Moscow for the first 15 days, I should say. And one of the things that I found most interesting was speaking to those via satellite in Ukraine, trying to get a handle on the energy capacity and situation and how that's evolved since that time. We've seen multiple attacks on energy infrastructure in that country, but we've also seen both public and private sector energy folks in Ukraine attempting to set up public-private partnerships with European governments. They're working with the United States. They're working with their partners across CEE countries as well to try and essentially secure their energy infrastructure and the future of Ukraine's infrastructure. But what about what's happening in the rest of Europe? Where are we? Are we secure today? If we could just take a couple of minutes at the top of this panel to get a sense from you guys, are we in a dire situation?
Well, thanks for the invitation, first of all. It's great to be here, and hello to everybody. Well, I remember Socrates once said that no one is more hated than he who speaks the truth. So I hope I don't offend anybody, but I don't think we're in the best state of affairs that we could be in. Obviously, security is having the light bulb turn on, but also having affordable energy and ideally green energy, but in that order of priority, which is, I think, pragmatic and wise. Well, at least in Romania's case, we have embarked on a very ambitious decarbonization path. However, it's very tough to replace coal with gas and then not be able to finance gas based on current EU regulation. And then we're still having skepticism on nuclear. So then what are we left with? It's hard to have secure energy without baseload production. And if you give up coal and gas and nuclear, there's not a lot of ways you can do baseload production. And so my first public appeal is to be pragmatic and to try to support a transition that is in the benefit of our citizens and truly secure. And my second point, and I'll be brief, is the fact that what we're seeing in the past couple of months in Europe is not okay. The energy market should be a single market. That was the dream of the founding fathers of the European Union. Well, it's not a single market today. We are paying prices in Romania and Bulgaria and Greece and sometimes Poland that are 3 times, 5 times, 8 times more than in other parts of Europe. I don't think that's a single market, and I think we need to speak the truth. And it doesn't take a genius to look at the map and see where the interconnections are and where there aren't, and where the cheap prices end and where the expensive prices begin. And we're very happy and grateful and honored to share the burden of responsibility of supporting the Republic of Moldova and Ukraine. But we cannot do it alone. That additional demand puts additional pressure on our prices, but I do believe we need true solidarity. Thank you.
What's the view from Poland?
Well, I can only build on my colleague's statement. I think it's a precarious situation that we're in, and it's not like we didn't see it coming. I'm really, astonished that we didn't use the previous lessons of Ukraine, the gas crisis. We just ignored them basically in Europe. I think it's fair to say that moving on with energy transition in Europe, we kind of assumed that international trade is taken for granted and it will be always secure, reliable, all the global partners will be reliable. And so we basically, as Europe, we outsourced energy transition. We outsource in a way that we rely on clean tech for energy transition, and we relied. Now we're trying to change that, but we assumed that we can rely on imported, mostly Russian gas to back up the energy system transition. So two things that are now biggest source of our problems. So really, we are in a bad situation, and luckily we finally woke up. The first two Ukraine crises didn't wake us up. The third one finally woke us up. So that's at least a good thing, good beginning.
Minister, you're a bit of a warrior in Brussels these days. Give us a sense of where you see things today.
Thank you. Good morning. I won't consider myself a warrior, but I was inspired by Siemens Energy. It's to me also a real privilege to be here in Warsaw today to participate in this conference as the former EU president, in which we worked a lot on specifically these issues. Coming back to your questions, are we safe? Are we okay? No, we are absolutely not safe and not okay. We are now as energy ministers beginning to prepare the third winter already. To help Ukraine through winter. And if Ukraine is not safe, if the countries bordering Ukraine are not safe, then the whole of Europe is not safe. And this was very well expressed by Tiana, also Christophe, and it was Albina, as you made this point several times during Council, and also Moldova is on our radar. But I remain optimistic. I read the book from Robert Kaplan this summer, The Tragic Mind, and he pleads for anxious foresight. And anxious foresight is also what should guide us in energy policies. Like Christophe said, we are outsourcing the energy transition. Our security risk is not that we are, or our competitiveness and our security risk is not that we are going too fast, but that others are going faster than us, like United States and also China. And that means that the technologies on which we rely to have a secure energy policy are now in the hands of China. And so as energy ministers, we will become in the next months and years, and also the new commission, we will also be defense ministers, security ministers, in order to have this safe and secure future. Coming back to technologies, Tiano, it is European law that every member state can decide on its own energy mix. And in every geographical context, we have specific challenges that we have to tackle. So instead of tackling each other on each other's choices, we should, as the European Union as a whole, be aware of the different security pitfalls that different technologies hold. For example, nuclear, but also renewables. And in order to have a secure future, energy future in in the future, we have to be certain that we have the technologies in our own hands, specifically critical infrastructure, for example, electronics that communicate with the grid. And sovereignty is, as was so beautifully said before, it's solidarity. We should interconnect to each other. It's interconnections that saved us through the crisis, and it's interconnections that will build a safe and secure energy future.
Christina.
Can I start? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having Moldova here. I think it's not a secret that Moldova has been affected after Ukraine the most because of the war. However, in February 2022, we disconnected from the grids that were connected to Russia and Belarus, and we tested the connection with NSOE, which normally would last for more than 15 years. And because the war started, they connected us immediately. Second, we were considered as a candidate member for EU accession, and now we are in the full process of acceding and becoming an EU member state. And the third, and maybe a very important thing for the Republic of Moldova, that we finally have a Ministry of Energy. And starting December 2022, we are not purchasing gas from Russia anymore for the right bank. However, energy has become a very, very expensive issue for the Republic of Moldova. And as we now embarking in this EU accession process, despite the fact that we are transposing the EU legislation, we need to build infrastructure, which we don't have. And this takes time, this takes a lot of investments, this takes human resources. For example, currently we are investing in 3 high voltage lines to connect us to Romania, meaning European Union, and to be part of a single market. But that is not easy. At the same time, what we can count now on in the Republic of Moldova is testing all kinds of renewables, which is biomass, biogas, wind and solar, of course. But since these are viable energy sources, we should also invest a lot in battery energy storage system, which is again very expensive. So practically we are moving at a very fast pace to catch with all the technologies that are taking place now in the energy sector. Plus, we are thinking about investing into innovations in energy and see how we can build a secure Republic of Moldova, of course, with the help of European partners.
What's the view from Lithuania?
Well, hearing comments of colleagues, of course, I have to acknowledge that enormous challenge which lies ahead of us. At the same time, coming from the Baltic region, I would like to be more optimistic because, well, let's look at facts. 3 Baltic countries will be reconnecting to the European electricity grid on the 8th of February, thus ending, Russian presence in the region, and the whole European Union will be connected. Second thing, we are embracing into unprecedented regional cooperation in the Baltics. We are launching new projects in the renewable energy, and in Lithuania alone, in 4 years, we have tripled installed renewable energy capacity, and we are on track to be fully decarbonized by 2030 in our electricity grid. So these are all positive news. Of course, there are difficulties, but it is good that we know those difficulties and we try to address them. So to summarize, I think for the future of our energy transition, dispatchable energy will be of high value, but flexible dispatchable energy will be priceless. So this is something we are working right now. We are working on enlarging our storage capacities, but I think the direction of full decarbonization is quite on track. There are some difficulties, everybody knows them, but I would like to stay optimistic and present an optimistic point of view here.
One of the questions, obviously, in the first year of the conflict was one, frankly, of support and resources. And if you look at what's happening, for example, in the United States right now, the big question, of course, is who will be the next president, but also will that mean continued support for Ukraine? And I bring this up because, Minister, you mentioned a pragmatic approach. At the end of the day, people have to be willing to pay, don't they? And that is going to be a deep concern as these energy costs rise. In your mind, are we going to see a situation where the public pushes back?
As long as we have true solidarity among European nations, I think the public will stand behind us. As long as they don't see huge discrepancies between EU member states, they will understand that we are all shouldering this burden, and we indeed stand right there with the Republic of Moldova and with Ukraine. Unfortunately, that is not the case. I'm happy that the Commission agreed, and there will be a point on the next meeting of the Councils of Ministers in Luxembourg to discuss these differences in energy prices. What we can do, I mean, Romania is investing a lot in increasing production. We have around 10,000 megawatts solar and wind under construction, and they will be done in the next 3 to 5 years. We have invested in nuclear. We're building 2 additional large-scale reactors, plus an innovative small modular reactor project in Doicești. It's supposed to be among the most advanced in the world. If all goes well, in 2029 we should have the first module functioning based on an American technology new scale. We're also investing in gas, and we're blessed to have gas, our own gas, in the Black Sea, in the Neptune Deep perimeter, which will make Romania the #1 gas producer in the EU in 2027, and we want to give that gas added value and use it as a transition fuel. So we're working on 3,500 megawatts of gas-powered turbines around the country. We're doing all this indeed to help lower the prices, to help with the green transition, and to also support neighboring countries. And we're investing a lot in our grid capacity. I know, Tina, we have a common passion for this. I don't think you can do a green transition without proper transmission. And so over the past year and 3 months, we've invested around 2 billion euros in our grids, transport and distribution. It's only a start. And the last point I'll make is storage. Although, you know, it's unfortunate that a lot of our storage solutions and batteries depend on faraway places, and we seem to be replacing a dependency on Russia with a dependency on other, perhaps not very friendly countries.
Storage costs versus the generation costs, one of the big questions as well. Minister, but specifically to the things that you've been fighting, the good fight, we'll say, in Brussels, and that, of course, is the dependency still on Russian sources of energy. In your mind, how far away are we, in reality, from being able to wean Europe off of this?
I think we have to appreciate how far we've come. I think all sitting here, we agree what repower. This is a piece of legislative action that we adopted at the EU, targeting ending dependence on fossil energy, on Russian energy. And I think we got to a point where we are 80% of the way, but the last 20% is extremely difficult, because we picked all the low-hanging fruit, and now we need to complete the task. And for some member states it's difficult, because for some it's the only source of imports or only source of gas. We're trying to work together in the spirit of solidarity to actually help these member states to complete the exercise. But it will be very difficult, and we have to agree that it's something that we need to do together. But during our presidency, which comes next, the Polish presidency in the European Union, we want to complete the repowered objective, so complete stop of Russian energy to Europe. I think this is the objective we need to see, we need to continue doing, because we already see that, for example, the gas imports to Europe have been dropping, and now, over the last couple of months, they on the rise again. So this is the last bit, the last sliver of the graph that we need to really persevere and finish. It's not going to be easy, but I know that with some countries like Belgium, like Lithuania, but also bigger countries, we're trying to keep this topic on the agenda, and I think that we can complete this difficult task.
What's the biggest challenge there in your mind?
I think the biggest challenge is that we need to balance energy security with affordability. I think this is by far the biggest challenge, because as Minister said, we need to keep the prices at the affordable level. For example, take the Polish situation where there is a lot of understanding if you say, okay, there will be a price increase, energy price increase because of security, because of us getting rid of Russian fuels. There is an acceptance in the society. But if you say, okay, we need to go green very fast, there's less of understanding. So now we have to combine the two in a clever way, saying, listen, but investing in distributed generation, in renewables, in other sources of energy also increases our security. But there is a level of pain in society that we need to really, really see and be careful of, because if we push too hard, then the public will say, well, no, I'm not going to agree to that. I think this is this kind of pain point.
Minister van der Straten, there's the public's perception, and then there's always like heavy industry, which of course is job creation, which of course goes right back to the money that goes in people's pockets every day. How do you balance this? When you think of heavy industry, obviously we're talking about energy prices, but that also impacts people's pockets at the end of the day, because if the factory isn't working and isn't producing, that impacts the economy.
Helping our manufacturing industry to stay in Europe is also protecting labor force. In Belgium, we have steel making, and we are not the only European member state with still having steel making or refineries, fertilizers. We have manufacturing industry all across Europe. So keeping them here and giving them access to reliable energy prices is one of the challenges, and that we can do. We have in recent legislation that was adopted, the EMD, the Energy Market Design, in which we combine two-sided contracts for difference in order for renewable energy or other technologies to be developed with a support mechanism to be combined with PPAs, so that heavy industries can buy these electricity directly. Is a hedge against volatility, a hedge against high electricity prices, and will give certainty that these manufacturers can stay here. But it's not heavy industry alone, it's also citizens. It's also making sure that if we build offshore wind turbines, as we are doing in Belgium, that also our citizens have access to this electricity. That's why in Belgium we combine heavy industry always together with purchasing power for citizens, and so the challenge of having affordability and energy is a real one, but that can absolutely be tackled. I think another challenge to add to your challenge is that as the 27 of us and allied countries, like accession countries, we have to stick together. We have to stick together. It is not a moment in time to normalize relations with Russia. Not explicitly, but not implicitly either. So that means whatever technology we choose, we should be independent as soon as possible on Russian imports. And for that, the incoming Polish presidency can absolutely count on our full support to have a clear agenda on Russian phase-outs for Russian energy in general. And it doesn't stop with Russia. And here I'm looking to Lithuania because you will be the new Commissioner for Defense is from Lithuania. But having, for example, all grid components that communicates of all assets, generation assets that communicate with the grid, to have this one labeled as critical infrastructure that should be produced, locally produced in Europe without interference from other unreliability regimes will also be a challenge for the upcoming Commission to have this secure and safe energy future.
What is Moldova crying out for at this point? Because as you mentioned in your conversation earlier, you've made many, many strides. You've moved forward very, very quickly. But what is it that the EU can do more to assist you?
Well, to be honest, I think the coming winter will be the most challenging one. Why? Because starting January 1st, the contract regarding Russian gas transiting Ukrainian territory will be off. And despite the fact that the right bank in the Republic of Moldova is not using gas anymore for almost Russian gas anymore for almost 2 years, we still have Transnistria, and the electricity we purchase is provided by Gazprom to Transnistria for free. So our electricity until December this year will be very cheap. What we will do next, we have several scenarios, but we can reroute, for example, the gas, and we can purchase electricity, but the question is at what cost? And because we are having now presidential elections and we have parliamentarian elections, so the fight for democracy is quite big because we are at a hybrid war and we are facing a lot of misinformation and disinformation in the Republic of Moldova. So despite our efforts to inform people about what the Ministry of the Energy does, all of the steps in building infrastructure, all of our efforts to ensure the security of supply for the Republic of Moldova, I think the final and the biggest fight will be given this winter. So we do our best, as I mentioned earlier, to transpose the European legislation to build infrastructure, but at the same time, as Minister of Romania mentioned, we need to feel the solidarity of our bigger partners, also with investments and financial support, because this just transition is not really just if we are left alone and people feel the burden of the bills.
For Lithuania, in previous interviews with your presidents, they made it very clear to me that energy independence was incredibly important. It's something that you have achieved in the sense that you are no longer, and frankly, made it a point to not be dependent on Russia. What advice do you have for Moldova?
I think we cannot separate the question of Moldova from the question of Ukraine, because I think both two countries have to be supported. For us, it is very easy to support Ukraine because we have enormous public support for that. More than 80% of people still believe that we need to increase our support to Ukraine. And that's why we are, one of the biggest donors per capita to Ukrainian energy sector. At the moment, we are dismantling 300 megawatts of CHP plant and sending it to Kharkiv region so that they can survive this winter. I think for a country like Moldova, the first step will be, to get rid of Russian influence and to get Gazprom expelled from a country. That was the way we have actually managed our gas independence. First, we bought back our state assets from Gazprom, and then we were able to build our LNG capacity, because it is, very naive to think that you can have import routes available for you when your grid is controlled by others. So first thing first is to regain independence, and then, I think with all the help of the European Union, and we stand ready to assist, those countries have a bright energy independent future.
but maybe also from a European perspective. And the second step would then be that in the European energy policy and in European energy policy making, we keep these regional initiatives front and center. Because the regional initiatives like CESEC, like the North Sea countries, like the Baltic region, they give insight what are the needs on the short term. And if CESEC, what you are doing within NSEC, will also be beneficial to Moldova, it will also create a stronger European, not strictly European Union, but a stronger European solidarity. And for that, we need also at European level that CEF, the Connecting Europe facility, is strengthened, that there are enough European funds available to create these projects, also in order to avoid that the money we need to invest in these interconnections is not put through one-on-one on the energy bills.
I agree. If I may add a few sentences, the CEF is basically laughable today. You can get some money to do a feasibility study, or build a few miles of cables, but it's not enough. It's certainly not enough. And I think the next budget, with more focus on security, also should expand funding of critical infrastructure. I think it's absolutely necessary.
I was just in Moscow 2 days ago speaking with the man that formerly ran just the energy portfolio, and now he's in charge of the entire economy. And you can imagine the comments that he made to me regarding the future of Russia's economy and the ability of them to fund their war. We also know, of course, in the last couple of days that they've decided to put an enormous amount of money into the military to make them essentially one of the biggest and most powerful militaries in the world. All of this leading to my question, which is that this, unfortunately, is a conflict that we do not still have an idea of how long will go on. In your mind, when we think about the cost, we're talking a lot about money, about how this is going to impact people's pocketbooks. Does Europe today have the ability to see it through in terms of the long haul?
Well, I'm glad I'm in Warsaw, because I remember the words of Lech Walesa, a great Polish statesman, who said, "We hold our heads high despite the price we have paid, because freedom is priceless." Freedom is priceless. We all need to understand it. And perhaps we understand it more on this eastern flank because we're closer to the conflict. Ukraine understands it the best out of all of us. They deal with bombs and violence and killings every single day. But really, this is, in my opinion, not about the money. Again, freedom is priceless. As long as we keep sanity, as long as we don't add to this imperative for security and mobilizing resources to support Moldova, to support Ukraine, we don't add the additional cost of ideological acceleration towards a green transition that is unsustainable and very costly in the context of the contribution, again, of Europe of 6% to global CO2 emissions, when we're facing war and violence and all these ills.
So you believe Europe is trying to move too fast?
It's on this dimension, yes. And once again, fine. CF is fine. We need it. But we also need to finance gas interconnections, very much so, at least as a transition fuel. We also need to finance nuclear. There's no option for financing nuclear now. None of the international financial institutions are financing nuclear. So it seems that we're hurting ourselves, where we could be perhaps a little more flexible in the short term so we can respond better to the crisis in Ukraine. And then once that's through, once our dependency on Russian gas is over, we can focus again on the green transition.
I'll let the Polish minister round us out because we've only got about 2 minutes left. I mean, do you subscribe to this narrative that we're moving too fast?
Yes, I fully subscribe to this. Listen, we have Fit for 55 package of regulatory things, and for example, we put in the European hydrogen strategy an explicit thing that we will import green hydrogen. Like, this is ridiculous. We should do everything. So the package includes rebuilding of European manufacturing capacities. And I agree with we need to do a health check of the legislation. If we cannot decarbonize and use technologies that we have, so there's something wrong.
Well, I do not agree on this point with Tiano. We are not hurting ourselves because we are decarbonizing. We are hurt because others go faster than us, like United States. In your country, the investments that you are attracting thanks to IRA and all these investments in electrolyzer capacity all go to United States because there is a very aggressive, very simple agenda to support clean technologies. Also, what's happening in China, we are launching in Belgium next offshore wind tender, and all our developers are going to China and look for Chinese wind turbines. So we are hurt by others who go faster, but that does not mean that we can do a health check on our legislation. Financing nuclear, it is possible. The EMD, it is possible through a CFD. We've done it in Belgium for the lifetime extension of our existing nuclear plants. We do it with a CFD. But what is very important, and I said it in the first question, qualitative criteria are important. We are not going to finance nuclear if it still relies on Russian technology or on Russian fuel, for example. And the same for offshore wind. We should also include qualitative criteria that the nacelle from the wind turbine is not coming from China. So it's not about a specific technology against, it's not black-white. It's assess each technology on its security aspects.
There you have it. Energy independence and the road to getting there. Panelists, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a seat because we have another panel discussion number 1. The topic is Europe's reindustrialization at reasonable price. So I believe we have a connection between the ministerial panel discussion and the one that is following. The moderator would be Maria Taddeo, European correspondent for Le Grand Continent. And the session is in partnership with Siemens Energy. So big applause for another moderator.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us on this session. I'm very happy to introduce my panelist, François-Xavier Bellamy. He's a member of the European Parliament. We are also joined by Klaus-Dieter Boschert. He's a senior research fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. And last but not least, Frédéric Deuillet, who is Senior Vice President, Europe Hub at Siemens Energy. And the session of this panel and the title, of course, has to do with the industry and energy. Those are the two key points, it seems, certainly now when it comes to policy making. Everyone agrees it needs to be competitive, but the first question that I would like to put to all of you is, How do you get there? Everyone agrees it needs to be competitive, and everyone agrees energy is key. But how do you make it happen? And if we can start with you.
Thank you so much for inviting us and for this occasion you give us of exchanging on this crucial topic, because there will be no security for Europe, no sovereignty for our countries, no possibility to maintain our freedoms and democracies if we are not able to produce what we need, and if we become over-dependent on what is produced by other parts of the world. And I think this is typically the trend on which we are going right now. So we have many battles to fight at the same time, of course, and I think we will take them step by step in this conversation. I would say for us now, the main challenge is to reverse this trend and to change the mindset of European leadership. Right now, when you talk to industrials, what they will tell you, and you have a greater experience of it than myself, but what many industrials across Europe tell you is that their main challenge now is not to find customers or to find the supplies needed to continue the production, but to face the reality of this regulatory burden, which has become the main nightmare of most of those who produce in Europe, be it, by the way, in industry or in agriculture, in the energy sector. So we have now to design a Europe that supports production. And the act of producing has become suspect, because of course we want to lead the fight about climate change, and rightly so. But the fact is that right now, our companies, our producers in Europe are already the ones following the most demanding regulations in the world on this environmental issue. So if we continue on this track right now, the fact is that in the end, we will give a competitive advantage to production outside Europe. And in the end, we will have a lose-lose solution. We lose on the economic point of view, from the social point of view, but also in terms of sovereignty and security. And in the end, we also lose on the environmental point of view, because we become dependent on other models in the world that are harming far more the environment than European companies do right now. So reverse the trend means changing completely, and I think that this is the main challenge right now in the European institutions and in the member states, trying to change completely our approach. We need a continent which produces, and a continent of production is not right now the trend on which we are going.
And you mentioned a lot of good points that we're going to go in further detail later. But I wondered, Mr. Bashred, there was a key point that Mr. Bellamy pointed out, and it has to do with pricing. The pricing of energy has to be competitive, otherwise you pay too much. And others will have a premium that you don't in terms of your competitiveness. How do you see this question of pricing changing, especially when it comes to Europe in the next few years?
Allow me first to continue what Mr. Bellamy just said, because I agree with him so far that we have to review our policy, but I would not call it reverse it. I would call it complement it, because what we did over the last 5 years, from 2019 with the Green Deal, was necessary. But it was a policy that was solidly focused on target setting, on setting the targets, how to reach over intermediate steps the 2050 net zero economy. But what we have seen now, and there I fully share your analysis, is that this goes for the time being to the detriment of our industry. We are about losing energy-intensive industry, and once you lose them, you will not get them back. And therefore it is important for me to complement. The price issue is a very important issue, but it's not the only one. I mean, pricing, you can do directly through a price subvention. You see the called industrial price setting. I personally am not in favor of regulated prices, neither for household, besides the vulnerable households, nor for industry. What I think is that we have to create the right conditions under which industry can work. And here the first thing I would change in the regulation is that we should not push for very specific and individual energy carriers or technologies. We should completely change and setting greenhouse gas reduction targets for the industry to say this is where you have to be. And then it is for the industry to choose the right energy carrier, the right technology, how best, the most suitable way and the most cost-effective way to do that. Now, on the energy-intensive industry, I can tell you how there was a proposal from the industry brought to the Commission, and this has foreseen that the industry wanted to change fossil fuel based production by renewables production. But if you take in a lot of renewable energy for your production, you have one big problem, and that's the intermittency, because you cannot be guaranteed that you have 24/7, 365 all the energy available. So you need a backup or a balancing, how you call that. And this comes with high costs, because if you have to buy this balancing energy, it's the most expensive energy. And that, the industry have said, we are willing to take in new renewables and changing that, but please give us a scheme that reimburses us on these extra costs, the shaping costs it's called. The Commission has said no. And this is a fundamental error, because this is one price element, because with that you would at the same time not only make the change in the production patterns from fossil to renewable, but you could also help industry to calculate on a sound basis also their price calculation. So these kind of things are needed, and I could add more examples. Maybe in the discussion it will come, but there are structural elements that could help the industry also to get to competitive pricing.
And I trust that you don't like the idea of the CBAM, but we will go into that in further detail later in the discussion. Mr. Douillet, obviously you represent the industry. Both have mentioned the industry. Now you're in a position, I guess, where you are privileged to some extent because policymakers want to hear from you too. If you listen to the Draghi report, energy was mentioned more than 100 times. So you're in a very particular place at this point. But I wonder, what do you want to see from policymakers? And there has been a switch now from Green Deal to now clean energy. I mean, the language matters here, from green to clean. What does that mean in reality?
And first of all, thank you for having me. And I think a lot of good things have already been said. Maybe adding on that, because of course, as Siemens Energy, we talk a lot to those industrial customers that have the burden of the high energy price. And also there, if we look a little bit into the past, but not so long past, 2-3 years ago, before the war in the Ukraine started, the tone whenever we had the meeting was much more on sustainability, while now it's also a lot on security and then affordability. And I mean, you have there are multiple examples of where you see European industrial companies moving to other parts of the world because energy is just much cheaper there than what we have in Europe. Now coming a bit to the solution or potential solution of the problem, and I think the Draghi report, as you mentioned, points out a couple of those things. I mean, the first thing is we need to be very honest, and a lot of investment will be needed during the next years in order to do that. That we shouldn't fool ourselves. The second thing is, as Europe, Europe is a very small continent. Yeah, it's compared to others. We don't have that many people living here, and individual countries are even smaller. So I think having a really integrated European energy network is a key to do that, and we are far away from that. To be very honest. And the third thing is, and then it comes again. There is always an interplay between politics, governments, and also the industry. Then we need more speed. Yeah, there are like. And I mean, the classic thing is how long it takes to have an offshore wind farm permitted and then on the grid. Yeah, it's years. And this can be faster. This needs to be faster because otherwise we will lose time, and then other areas of this world, other regions will gain the competitive advantage on us.
And just very briefly, when you said we need investment, the number that Draghi put on the table is huge. It's 800 billion euros. Obviously, it's a full package of other things, but on an annual basis. Is that a number that you say is an industry perspective? He's not wrong. You're talking billions and huge amount of money.
It is for sure not wrong. Yeah, a lot of intelligent people
in that area
have worked on that report, and it's also what we see. Yeah, you need billions of euros in the next years to come in our energy network, and that's across the board. Yeah, it's not only renewable generation. It's also, it was mentioned a couple of times also in the minister talk before. Huge investments in the grid and in the infrastructure needed, because there has been significant underinvestment in the last not only years but decades, to be very honest. And then also, of course, alternative fuels like hydrogen or other e-fuels need to come into the game, where we are really only at the beginning yet. So there is for sure the number that was stated in the Draghi report is definitely not too low. Yeah.
It depends who you ask.
I remember. I just remind you that after the COVID-19, we had a 780 or 76 billion package for the Recovery and Resilience Fund, and here it is a bit the same magnitude. But what you are getting out of it, it's also creating growth, it's stabilizing the economy, and it's creating also jobs. I think this is money that is very well invested, because the problem when you compare what has been done with the 780 billion from the recovery fund, a lot of money has not even been used. And where you see the usage, I cannot say that it's always the best way to do it. If we now target the expenditures of this 800 billion really to the grids, to the technologies development and new production, then I think we get something more out of it. So for me, I'm not scared about the figure. I'm scared how will the EU get to that money. That's a big problem. Because, as you know, Draghi has proposed green bonds. I think he has good arguments for that, but you have the so-called frugal member states that, among those Germany, they refuse. But I think it's an error, because it is money that if it's well spent, will benefit the whole EU and all member states.
If I may just say, that's a very good point that you made, because, well, you are German yourself. There is a criticism these days that Germany's sort of stuck in a mentality of no to everything, sort of replicating a system that no longer works for the German economy. The changes are so structural, the old recipe just no longer works. It doesn't work on the energy, it doesn't work on China, it doesn't work on the exports. So do you believe they're making a mistake? Or certainly the finance ministry, perhaps, saying flat out no at the beginning?
I think for the moment Germany has lost its compass. The compass for the policy and the measures that are needed. And you can see that they are involved in struggles. We are discussing now the imposition of duties on e-vehicles from China. And we will have the vote next Friday, and Germany is still trying to find a blocking minority. And this is appalling. I mean, we have to take the international competition seriously. The EU always was and will be open for competition if it is a fair competition. And what we are doing here is just using defensive instruments against unfair trade. And just for national interests, blocking such an EU instrument is not a viable way to go.
And now, of course, a question to you. You were nodding, so if you want to add anything to that point. But I had specifically a question for you, because in the European elections, obviously you're part of the EPP, there was a very remarkable change in tone in some ways, in which the EPP did say climate at times has become very ideological. It needs to be seen also from a perspective of business and reality. And the question around green became, it has to be business friendly. So I wonder, what does that mean in practice when you say it has to be business friendly? And do you believe at times, yes, the issue is that there's a lot of regulation that is being presented from a view that perhaps is too political?
Before I answer your question, I just wanted to reflect on what you just said. I can't agree more on what you expressed about unfair competition. And by the way, this is also kind of an answer to this green strategy that we need to implement. We are in the front of a global challenge. And this challenge cannot be solved only by Europeans. It's not only by going to the net zero in Europe that we will solve the situation. If we make zero emissions in Europe, we can, by the way, make it by having zero work, zero prosperity, zero companies, zero production. At this moment, we will not have solved the climate issue. We will only have given all our markets to the type of production which is harming the most the climate. So it's what I was trying to touch. And now we need to rebuild the fair competition. As Europeans, we have the leverage to do so. Of course, it will have a cost, but we need to face this cost, because if this is not the case right now, then the cost will be even higher tomorrow. And I think that the bet on dependencies that was made by some Europeans in the past years has proven to be false, be it on energy, be it on industry, on markets, be it also on security. We may speak about it also. This bet on dependency has to come to an end, and we need, of course, to face the consequences now. I have a slight difference, and there we will have a strange Franco-German conversation, because we are a little bit in reverted positions. I'm not at all certain that the main part of the Draghi report is about the green bonds or the euro bonds. And I don't think, and in a way France is a country that proves by itself this fact, that it is necessary and sufficient to spend public money to create prosperity and to create development. I think if this would be the case, if the maximum of public debt would mean exactly this, then France would be today the paradise of Europe. Sadly, it's not the case, you know. We are in a moment of instability also because of this budget crisis in which we are right now. The main task we have to fulfill if we want our economy to find the leverage in terms of budget to develop itself is to find also solutions inside the private sector. And for me, the real thing that is a challenge we have to face now is not only this union of energy you were talking about, we worked on it, but union of the banking sector, union of capitals. How come that we didn't find a solution to make it happen? And this is right now one of the main challenges that our companies face. They do not ask for public subsidies. They do not ask for Eurobonds. What they are asking is that they can find in the private sector, they can find in the banking sector in Europe, the leverage to develop. And right now it's not the case. Because again, in this sector also, we've been regulating. And then today, 20 years ago only, the 10 biggest banks in the US were the same size of the 10 biggest banks in Europe. Right now, the 10 biggest banks in Europe are at the size of the sole first bank of the United States. So we see the incredible discrepancy between the development of our financial sector in Europe and in the US. On this green question you were asking, I think I already touched the point, but I just wanted to say it's not something that EPP discovered at the moment of elections. Mm-hmm. We were raising this concern during the whole mandate. I came in the European Parliament in 2019. We talked about this risk of having a strategy about green issues that was completely forgetting the economic reality. And we fought against nature restoration law, for example. Not because we do not want to protect nature. Of course we want to protect nature. But what we know is that it's not by arming our capacity of production in Europe that we will solve, again, this global challenge we have to face.
So then what do you do? Because what was approved as a law is now the law. So you cannot do that because that would be terrible for investors who wouldn't know what is the legal value of anything that gets approved. Regulation, new one, what do you do? Do you stop it? Do you review it? I mean, what's the way forward? Because a part of it is already in the law, essentially.
I mean, I was not thinking that we should revert what has been done, but we should revert at least the logic behind and change deeply the way we are strategizing about this issue. I think it's not something that we should avoid to talk about. We need simplification. And when we speak about this, when we speak about lifting the regulatory burden, it means also taking the assessment of the consequences of what has been voted and implemented. We were talking about CBAM. When we look at the implementation, it happens to be a real difficulty for many sectors. So how do we repair what needs to be solved?
So that means a pause for a while? Is that essentially what you're saying?
We were the group asking, again, since 2021, for a moratorium on environmental regulations. So it's not, again, something that we are starting to talk right now because elections happened. We always say that this is a huge concern. And again, when we speak about lifting this regulatory burden, it must involve concrete consequences. We will have a commissioner responsible for this work of simplification, and I think that we should put on the table the issues that we have to deal with, and industry and companies and the economic sector have to take part in this. You know, when I think about the AI Act, for example, it's a great thing that Europe is able to regulate this new field of technologies. But the fact is, it's also a problem for creation, for innovation, for research. So let's talk with the people who are acting in science, acting in companies, and let's engage in this conversation where we will know what we have to change. I tell to my own colleagues in the European Parliament, at the end of this mandate, we will not be judged only on the text that we will have written, but on the text that we will have destroyed. And I think it's something that also we should adopt as a new mindset in the way of our responsibility as legislators.
And maybe let me directly react to that, because it's how you say it and what you say is music to my ears. Yeah, to have this commissioner for simplification. To be honest, and to challenge you a little bit on that, I mean, we had similar positions. Maybe there wasn't a commissioner, but another thing in the past, which, if we honestly look into the past, didn't really solve the problem, but made it.
But right now we have a majority. And this makes a great difference.
I hope so, because I think that is the one thing that we also need to see, and also there, maybe building on what you said before, I think not only in the politics there was a rethinking. Also, if you think on the public sentiment, you also see that energy affordability, also for private households, became much more important than it was a couple of years ago. And even also when you look at companies, for example, there was like a couple of years ago when you looked at the companies who were supposed to be very high on their sustainability scale, they also were, their share price was also pretty high and the market capitalization was pretty high. This changed dramatically throughout the last 3-4 years. I mean, BP, they just skipped their sustainability targets and their share price was going up big time. So I think it's also, we need the public will there to come back and make that possible. And this is also about storytelling. I think there the politic and also the industry plays a big role in telling everybody, the public, the truth of what needs to be happen. And you can spin it very positive, because we are not such a resource rich region like others. So, but we can be the front runner in green technologies as well, be it on the generation side, but also on the transportation and the storage side. And I think this is something we need to play, and the Draghi report also talks about the innovation power that Europe needs to gain back. And I think this is exactly where we need to focus on.
On simplification, I can tell you that I have been working 33 years within the European Commission, and I've seen 7 commissions coming and going, and each time the main topic was simplification. And when you look now where we are, we have not achieved simplification, but we have tremendously complicated the life, and unnecessarily. And now I come to what you call moratorium and pause. This does not fit with what you explained, because if you really want to have simplification, if you really want to make a change where it is necessary, if you really want to go into a capital market, if you really want to help industries, more legislation is needed, but targeted. As I said, you have to revisit almost all acts that have been adopted under the Fit for 55, because you have to take out these sector-specific targets. You have to open up that industry can freely choose the technology that they want to use in order to decarbonize. You have to make also the necessary legislation for the capital markets. So I don't think that the moratorium is the right word for it. You have to shift the focus towards these industrial-related issues. And one word on CBAM, because carbon border adjustment mechanism, there also something needs to be done, because you are right. When you look at the CBAM as it stands today, what can you say? If I look at a global market and we take a global steel maker, this steel maker, he can do cherry picking. He can go to countries with a low carbon footprint and makes the steel there and sends it to Europe. So no CBAM or very small. And the same global steel maker, he can send the steel that was produced in high carbon countries will be sold elsewhere. That means we have no net benefit on climate change, and they have undergone the CBAM charge. The second problem that I see, if you take the CBAM charge, what you achieve is a relative competitiveness between the imports and the EU-produced products under the ETS. But what you do not have is that the European industry, they have to internalize the greenhouse gas reduction costs, which the imported products have not. So the negative competitive advantage remains, and what would be needed would be an export rebate, so to promote exportation. But if you do that, you might get into trouble with the WTO rules. But at least it would be worthwhile to undergo this. And then you know that the CBAM Act says that if a country has equivalent rules as our ETS system, then there will be no charge or a reduced charge. I would be very interested to see how the EU, the Commission in this place, will define what is equivalent. I mean, does that mean that you want to export the ETS system over the world? Certainly not. It's carbon taxes that are good, but how can you compare that? What is this? All these details are unknown, and therefore, if you really want to make the CBAM usable tool, then I think you absolutely need to sit down and work on these details. Otherwise, this remains a paper tiger, which in my view, it was at the beginning because the EU wanted to convince other countries to do something similar as a carbon tax or a carbon market. And that's also why in the COP29 this issue is still on the table, because the solution, in my view, is an international carbon market system.
And now, of course, I want to open questions to the audience. If there are questions, put your hand up and say who you represent and ask a question directly to one of the speakers. But before I do that, Mr. Deya, there was a question, however, that I wanted to ask in particular, because it's not a secret that we're in Warsaw. A lot of the conversations around regulation and a lot of the conversations especially around what is clean and green, obviously the barometer is different depending on which country you start with. And there is still a form of separation between some of the West-East on this question. When you look at Siemens and the work that you do, how important is it to address this gap and try to implement regulation, but in a way that is cohesive to both? Because there's an element of cohesion in the EU that's always at play.
Good question, and I think first of all, I've also was in contact with a lot of Eastern European politicians over the past, and I mean, what I was very impressed to see that there is always a clear plan behind each country or most of the countries how to transition to a more green or cleaner fuel, and then also, of course, there are several challenges that we have in countries, and it's not every country is the same, of course. But the use of coal is generally, of course, still higher in Eastern European countries than it is in Western economies. And of course, the dependency on Russia, also due to grid connection, was, because now we also heard from the minister talk before that also this connection is now cut to Russia, and it's more into the European grid. And I think there it's the question you're asking, what is the difference between maybe green and clean, is also a very fair one, and I mentioned that in my speech before. When you just get rid of coal-fired power plants and replace them by modern gas-fired power plants, if you do that globally, you would cut CO2 emissions by 50%, which is an immense number. And in Poland, for example, also in Romania, we have seen a couple of those examples where we have converted coal-fired power plants into gas-fired power plants, and by this saving a lot of CO2 emissions to those countries, plus ensuring the energy security and the affordability as well.
And just very briefly, of course, because we are in Poland, that is clear for everyone to see. Some investors look at countries like Poland and they say objectively it is, not as clean and it's browner, but that actually provides perhaps in some ways a bigger investment opportunity. I wonder, however, specifically, because there was a change in government in Poland, what impressions do you get from the administration of Prime Minister Tusk? Do you believe there's a real interest in carrying this through?
Absolutely, and I think the problem here is very well understood. And 60% still is of the electricity demand is still based on coal, which will drastically shift. So, and also this government, but also the previous government in Poland has done already big things in order to fuel that transition. For example, I mean, in the Baltic Sea, you have a lot of offshore wind farms now coming already on the grid, and then coming are in the pipeline for the next years to come as well. So I think both the previous government and also this government even accelerated now the trend towards green energy. Also, for example, on district heating, which is also very reliant on coal still, but also there we see a big shift in transitioning it to either green fuels or gas. So there is definitely a good plan for Poland and how to transition to a more green and cleaner energy country.
And since we're reaching the end of the session, we have to talk about a part still of the debate, which has to do with nuclear. For some, believe it is part of a greener energy mix. Others, obviously in some countries in particular, believe it's a sort of devil reincarnated. It's incredible that it's still on the table. I wonder for you...
you cannot ask a French person that question, huh?
Well, maybe you can also answer it if you want to. But on a serious note, beyond the politics, why is this still such an issue?
Because people don't take climate challenge for serious. I mean,
not including nuclear.
Of course. I mean, we voted in the beginning of the last mandate a resolution on the climate emergency. It was a wish from our Green colleagues, and we had a huge discussion in the group because declaring a state of emergency was remembering of bad memories for many European countries. But in the end, okay, we thought that on the content we agree. We voted on this resolution. The day after, in another text, the same Green colleagues were putting an amendment asking to shut down as quickly as possible all nuclear plants in Europe. I mean, this means concretely not taking for serious the climate emergency. Because if you are really considering it seriously, then we can't make it without nuclear. It's not me, as French, saying this. It's IRGC. It's science. It's facts. You can't say that we have a planet that is burning, and then in the end, your main objective is to destroy one of the biggest assets we have to produce a clean energy. So now we have to be serious, and I'm very much concerned by the fact that despite the change in the majorities, both in European Parliament and in European countries, so also in the Council, in the end, the European Commission is giving the portfolio of energy to a commissioner which has a real commitment against nuclear. What is this about? I mean, do we want to continue to fight for these reactionary battles about this religious approach. I mean, religious approach of environment. People who are fighting this battle are showing that they do not want a solution to the climate emergency. They only want the degrowth of Europe. They want a change in our economics. They want to get out of market economy. Okay, fine. If you are still fighting the classical Leninist battle, I'm a philosophy teacher by profession, I'm ready to engage in the conversation. But when we talk about climate, let's talk about it with a serious approach, because this is for real. It's not something which should approach with theological disputes. And when we are thinking that the European Commission was keeping nuclear outside of the taxonomy, and we had to fight this very strong battle. I was in charge of this fight when I tabled amendments also on the recovery fund, where again nuclear was in principle excluded. Let's come again to technological neutrality. This is not, by the way, only about energy. This is in many fields. Technological neutrality. I'm not a lobbyist of nuclear. I'm a lobbyist of technological neutrality. Nuclear may not be the energy of the future. It has, of course, its issues. It has its risk, and we should do everything to cope with it seriously. But for now, it's very clear that if we get outside of this, with the intermittency issues that you were touching, we are in fact maintaining this dependency over fossil fuels. And by the way, it's very interesting to see who has been financing in the European conversation for a very long time the anti-nuclear lobbying. It was clearly Russia. It was Gazprom. It was Nord Stream 2. And this has been documented. So we should not be naive also about the foreign interference happening in this discussion.
Can I just say, just very briefly, because you said there has been a change in majority in Europe. What you're essentially saying is Europeans are turning to the right. And when you look at the Greens, you would have assumed they would have done so well, but actually lost in some countries a remarkable amount of seats. Are you saying, however, the composition of the Commission, at least so far, and that's what you're concerned about, does not reflect that?
I'm saying the way the Commission is organized does not reflect that, because the majority in the Commission is clearly changing also. We will have in this new Commission 15 EPP commissioners on 27. And when I speak about this energy debate, saying that the majority changed, it's not only at the moment of this election. During the previous mandate, we saw a shift because there has been a wake-up call with the war in Ukraine. There has been a wake-up call with this energy crisis that we faced. And thoroughly we saw slightly, but concretely, the majority changing inside the European Parliament. At the end of the previous mandate, there was a regular majority to support nuclear inside European energy policies. So there has to be this has to be taken into account. And when I see that the portfolio of energy has been given to a commissioner who happens to be clearly committed in this fight against nuclear, I mean, I don't challenge the fact that he thinks what he thinks is free for his own convictions, but giving to him, especially this portfolio, means that the Commission is not ready to take into account the fact that now there is a clear will of the majority of European countries, majority in the European Parliament, to go for this, again, technological neutrality.
Thank you.
And I was joking in the beginning because, and you made us a very serious and good remarks that I can only second, because this is like the energy transition is not such a simple thing that you say, okay, we do this and then it's done. You need several technologies, and different countries have different requirements and different resources. So not every country will be the same. And I think definitely nuclear needs to play a part in that, because with regards to CO2 emissions, it's quite positive, and also on the affordability side, it makes a difference. So we will have that in the mix in Europe, and you also see in certain, France is one country, Poland is another country, Romania is another country, where we see nuclear power plants gonna be new built as well. Yeah, and this will be part of our energy mix going forward as well. Otherwise, we will not cater the big demand that is coming up.
Mr. Borchert, I have to end of time, so very briefly your final remarks.
I can
no pressure.
Subscribe to what was said about the role of nuclear. Absolutely, we need it, and it's a clean energy, full stop. And therefore, it is baseload energy that we need also to combat the intermittency. The only short remark is that I think you are over-interpreting the designation of Mr. Jørgensen with the energy portfolio, because the Commission is a collegial animal, and the Commissioner might have its own conviction, but he is not determining the policy of the Commission. That is done collegially, and therefore, I mean, if you would really start to look for somebody to fill out this portfolio and supports the ideas of the EPP, then I think Ms. von der Leyen would still look for designing her team. So it's impossible, and I would not over-interpret this nomination of Mr. Jørgensen as an act against the development of nuclear. I think the Commission has learned, and you have seen maybe now on the Low Carbon Energy Definition Act, that nuclear again is in. So I think the Commission has learned its lesson and is now taking a much more, let's say, objective, if not now, at least fully satisfactory stance. But at least it's a big step for the Commission compared to the initial one. And you reminded us the battle on the taxonomy.
Well, the good thing is the auditions will happen in Parliament, so we see who passes or who fails, because one or two may not make the cut. So we'll see at the end of the sessions. Well, thank you so much to the three of you for taking all these questions. Thank you, of course, to the audience. It was a pleasure. And now this is the end of the session, but of course, the forum continues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the Europe in the reindustrialization at reasonable price. And now another panel discussion. The topic would be the controlling key resources, Europe's role in geopolitics of green transition. As you can see, we are ready for the opening remarks from Kai Mykkänen, Minister of Climate and the Environment from Finland. Big applause for him.
Right, dear friends, dear colleagues, very important topic, very important days, tackling one of the main challenges that we have in Europe. Thinking about Europe's role in geopolitics of green transition, my first message to be elaborated also during panel discussion is that I claim that Europe must keep leading the transition away from fossil dependencies. That must be done fast and by a determined manner. Stagnating to fossil dependencies would mean much more acute dependency on Near East, on Russia, on other areas than what we even in the worst case could have if we are dependent on, let's say, certain minerals in critical minerals or to certain chips or certain technologies. If you think about megawatt hour of energy produced either by fossils or by wind, solar, nuclear, if you think about transport, logistics, kilometer, either energized by fossil oil or by electricity, hydrogen, or synthetic fuels from clean sources, it's clear that if we are dependent on fossil oil, foreign fossils overall, we are much more acutely dependent on daily basis, and we are much easier able to cope and to get rid of those dependencies that we of course face also when it comes to the critical technologies of clean industry. So let's not hesitate getting rid of fossils because of the geopolitics of green transition. And now when we look to the basic guidelines of the newly elected President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, the guideline speech that she gave for the European Parliament in July, or the mission letters which she has given for the candidates of all the commissioners, we are supporting that basic general line that we must keep the cornerstones of the green transition, Green Deal in place, and at the same time turn it into more competitiveness, industrial, anti-fossil deal, and to more of an investment deal, definitely. Some lessons learned from past, I would say, 15 years, and especially from Nordics perspective, Finnish, Swedish experience. First, even if things look impossible, sometimes impossible becomes possible. 20 years ago, when I was already studying and interested about combining environmental responsibility to market economy, those days if I would have been saying for you here, for example, that wind will be the second largest source of electricity in Finland and in the whole Nord Pool system, nobody would have believed that. Now we have 95% fossil-free electricity system in the Nordics, and in Finland also, if you look only aerial production. 20 years ago, we had half of the electricity from fossils. Now, the same thing is happening in district heating, actually. We are very fast getting rid of fossils and actually diminishing the share of overall burning anything when we produce heat. So now when we are thinking that whether it's really possible to start using hydrogen as energy carrier, or whether it's totally lunatics who think that CO2 can be taken and used for synthetic fuels, even if those things now look impossible or too expensive, only within 10 to 15 years they might become actually very viable, relevant and financeable solutions. Second lesson is that you definitely need continuity, predictability, long-term commitments. In Finland, in the Nordics, we see that the main driver has been technology-neutral pricing of carbon emissions, which has been both from EU level as ETS carbon pricing system, but also from local systems, carbon taxation, which was, I think, first taken to policies in Finland and in Sweden already 30, 40 years ago, and then being, of course, increasingly taken to higher stages of carbon pricing, has been the main vehicle actually making the investments possible for the energy and industrial sectors. So that's why we need rather fast decision about 2040 target. We are supporting the 90% net reduction target with certain preconditions, but we need to decide about that during next 2 years. Otherwise, we will be lacking investment certainty for industry. Third lesson is that we need technology neutrality, all technology neutral approaches. During last 10 minutes of the previous panel, they were discussing about nuclear, and I pretty much agree with all that was said last 10 minutes in that panel. In Finland, we would have not been possible to do the miracle of getting rid of fossils without increasing nuclear to about 40% of our electricity mix currently. And that's why it's important in European level that if we are serious about green transition without too much problems for our competitiveness, we need to revisit the Renewable Energy Directive, taxonomy, RFM biofuels legislation to make them really technology neutral when it comes to non-fossil energy sources. In the meanwhile, it's of course very important to keep global competitiveness. Europe must be competitive. In here, I believe that it's not a question whether carbon border adjustment mechanism is productive or not, but it must be. We must find ways how to actually balance the lacking carbon pricing in India, in China, in other parts of the world by using this mechanism. Of course, it will be not perfect in the beginning, for sure. We just gave the legislative proposal for our national parliament of implementing CBAM, but we must keep working with that to make it a significant barrier against unfair competition. We need also to be much faster in permitting critical minerals, net zero industry, other things. It's mainly national thing, but also EU-level legislation must be streamlined. And we overall must turn Green Deal into more industrial, clean investment deal, which the newly elected Commission seems to be at least taking the right approach. In Finland, we have been also witnessing fast, positive development in low-carbon roadmaps of the different industrial sectors, especially energy sector. Very inspiring. During summertime, they published a new approach that they are themselves believing that the energy sector in Finland will be net zero carbon industry within 10 years' time, already by 2035. That kind of approaches we need to support and get industry themselves to plan the way forward to sustainable future. But what we need to do is to do our homework, have long-term, durable, predictable targets and policy framework. We need to start now, frame and decide the post-2030 architecture of European climate and energy legislation, and I really hope that we would be able to go forward already first half of next year when Poland is actually taking presidency in the EU, and we, Finland, are very eager to support that road towards sustainable, technology-neutral, competitive Europe. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was the opening remarks from Kai Mykkänen, Minister of Climate and the Environment from Finland. Thank you very much. And once again, controlling key resources, Europe's role in geopolitics of green transition. That is the topic of another panel discussion. And the moderator would be Piotr Przybyło, Resident Fellow in Kazimierz Pułaski Foundation. Big applause.
Good morning. I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists today, speaking about the key resources. Marc-Antoine Mizaga, Director, Center of Energy and Climate from France. Sebastian Puczennik, Director from Foundation for Polish-German Cooperation from Poland. Sergei Lagodinsky, member of the European Parliament from Germany. And last but not least, Monika Morawiecka, Senior Advisor and Regulatory Assistance, representing Poland. Truly Weimar Triangle representation. Welcome. In terms of controlling key resources, is Europe controlling their key resources? What's the sort of view from your perspective? Marc-Antoine.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I think it's a real challenge that we're facing because none of the resources that we need today or tomorrow we have control on. The gas price, the oil price, the steel price, the aluminium price, the raw material prices, everything is set outside. And to make matters worse, in several cases, the electricity price, because of the marginal gas pricing system, is also set outside of our control. So we are basically price takers. Now it seems we are somehow luckier because there's a lot of LNG available and because the Saudis tend to be fed up with their fellow OPEC panel members cheating on volume, so more willing to give up more production and exports. But it's a very complicated situation to be in. So we have the highest energy costs, and the costs and the prices for the things that we consume or that we need to produce are set outside. And often in jurisdictions where there's no carbon pricing, there's very loose regulation. So that doesn't mean we should stop or we should dismantle everything we have, but you know the framework is very, very complicated.
You're painting very gloomy picture and landscape for Europe. Sebastian, what's the view from your point? Are we outsourcing our energy resources to someone else instead of sort of increasing our independence? What's your view?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. And answering your question, I think I mean here the European Union, Europeans, we got acquainted to a system of open trade. So of course we can purchase our critical materials and energy outside, and this is only a matter of price, which must be a market price, of getting access to that. I think this world is over now. There is so much intervention now on critical markets. There is so much regulation that we need to be prepared to negotiate very harshly on every detail of these of this kind of exchange. Peter Thiel, well-known investor and also we can say political activist, commented once very rightly the situation of Germany, now trying to escape from the trap of being too dependent on gas and energy imports from Russia. That he said that China is like Nord Stream multiplied by 100. So this dependency is much more dangerous for the German economy. When we talk about German economy, we must extend this argument to the whole continent because our industries are intertwined and mutually dependent.
Thank you. Sergei, so European Union is trying to sort of somehow, provide a strategy, sort of the energy strategy for entire Europe, for example, with the Critical Raw Material Act. What's your view? Is that's enough? More has to be done? Because at the moment we are hearing really gloomy scenario and not that sort of bright future. Where are we standing?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for inviting us here, and it's important to speak about those issues, especially here in Warsaw, where we have been hearing warnings regarding our key resources and raw materials and our dependencies on certain powers with whom we do not trade anymore. And we have been ignoring, not us, the Greens were always on the right side of history, but many in our German government, for example, were ignoring those warnings, and now we have to pay the high price that we're paying. We are now in a new age when we talk about resources and materials. It used to be that this was kind of a twofold debate. Either this was an environmental debate
for the green freaks like myself, or it was a growth debate. Without resources, no economic growth. Now we are in the geopolitical realm, where both of those dimensions get together and where we understand that this is just one part of a geopolitical game we are in. And the geopolitical games we used to play were on different chessboards. There was a chessboard of hard power, and there was a chessboard of soft power. Well, there is another chessboard now in town, and this is the chessboard of green power. And talking about green, I mean the green transition we are in. This is the actual new game which we are playing, and we have to play. And in this game, there are powers who play it only in terms of controlling resources like Russia, but there are also powers who play in it also in terms of designing their own green transition, like China. And these might be powers where we are not aligned in terms of values, but they are there, and we have to have a strategy vis-à-vis those powers. So the Raw Materials Act of the European Union is one part of this package. With our CHIPS Act, we're talking about another dimension of the green and digital transition that we're talking. But the main point here is the shift toward a geopolitical transitional thinking. And now with Draghi report, we understand that this transition from A to B cannot be a flat transition. It has to be linked to a diagonal. If A is here, then B has to be here. We must link it to growth. We must link it to competitiveness. And if we have an agenda where competitiveness and growth work together with the green transition and democracy, then we need the strategic thinking and geopolitical thinking about our raw materials and resources. This is the thinking that we have to exercise, and that's why the European Union is here on the right side of history, and that's why we, the Greens, also support it, because this green transition will only be possible if we think about it in strategic terms, also in terms of our resources.
Thank you. Monica, what's the view from your perspective?
Well, thank you, and it's very good to be speaking last in this first round, and especially after previous panels, because I really like to first focus on the false narrative that we have, that I think is false narrative, that we are, with the transition we're doing, that we are replacing one dependency on fossil fuel imports with another dependency on technology imports, because it's completely different dependency. From a security of supply perspective, from our energy security perspective, it's a completely different world. Being dependent on fuel supplies for your current generation needs, for your current heating needs, for your current power generation, it's a completely different story than depending on imports of technologies for future investments. So if we freeze in time, and I'm now thinking, okay, one scenario, I'm fully dependent on fuels. Day by day, I need to, fire those power plants with those fuels, and somebody cuts those fuels, I'm done. In the another scenario where I'm dependent on future technology imports for my future investments, then if somebody cuts that, exporting technology to me, okay, I won't make those investments, but I'm still secure in the short term. So it's a different perspective. It's not an energy security perspective, it's a competitiveness perspective, and it's speed and cost of the transition perspective. And I think we have to balance it out. Because, of course, we don't want to import all technologies, all green technologies we need from elsewhere. We would like to have them produced in Europe, of course. And it's a question of our industrial standpoint, of our competitiveness, of our economic development, of our jobs. All that is true. But then we have to balance it with the speed we're going at and with the cost of it. Because if Chinese turbines are 40% cheaper than produced in Europe, then we'll have to ask ourselves, where is our priority? Okay, we might do it slower, we might do it later, the transition, we'll have it domestic. But let's keep that in mind, that these are trade-offs. We can't have it all, and I think Draghi report also lays it out. We can't have it all. We have to choose But let's not be fooled by this false narrative that we are just replacing one dependency with other, because it's not the same dependency.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting, and you almost... I wanted to ask Mark, based on what Monica just said, in terms of Europe and the need for sort of energy transition, we need those critical raw materials, and I'm not going to be sort of, the quoting right now the percentages, but we know that in terms of production and processing, even if we can sort of supply those critical raw materials from other countries like Australia, Chile, which are not sort of, the Southeast Asia sort of, located. What can we do in terms of sort of that sort of dependency on China? Is that sort of affecting the energy transition? You see in terms of the future, that might affect the speed of the energy transition? If we're speaking about production and processing of critical raw materials coming from China, we are fully dependent on that, sort of, building on what Monica just said.
Yes, China is clearly the opportunity, but also the extraordinary challenge. And I mentioned that, they set basically all the raw material prices. And now all the raw material prices, just when we are to invest, are going down because they so decided, because they want to make sure that their dominant position remains. So it adds to the challenge, because if prices are up, it's easier to launch the investments than when prices are down. So that's one point. Point two, everyone really needs to understand that the challenge on raw materials is for the next 10 to 15 years, because once all the low carbon technologies are deployed in Europe, all the materials will be here and we will recycle it. So we will less need to mine, we will less need to import, because everything will be here, provided that our legislation makes sure that all these products stay in Europe. And as we speak today, right here in Europe, all the battery material scrap that goes out of the gigafactories, all the already existing small volumes but still existing black mass volumes, all these leave the EU borders. They are very valuable materials. They leave the EU borders and they go to our competitors. By the way, not only China but also South Korea. So we should fix that very clearly. Now the next point is, yes, we are going to need to import many of those raw materials, and so we will have to support mining operations abroad. But a mine is not an operation where you tick all the ESG boxes. We have to be flexible with that. So what I see now is that our institutions want to have the best perfect mining project that doesn't exist. So basically they don't finance anything. So if I look at what the European Investment Bank is doing, it's nothing. Now I look at what the Americans are doing. The US Financial Development Corporation has just issued for 30 projects within a few months, 400 million of credit loan guarantees and various support measures for 30 critical raw materials projects in the world, in Africa, in Latin America, elsewhere, so that they make sure that the material goes to the US. And, so for us, the decision is also, do we want a perfect transition or do we want to work on a process, And on China, to finish, and on the issue of competition, very clearly, if we want to roll out the offshore wind today in Europe, we will have to have Chinese equipment. But if we are not careful, we will be overflooded. The Chinese, within 3 years, have installed over 30 gigawatt of offshore wind. That is more than us in Europe, with the UK, with Norway combined, that we did in 15 years. So the fast and the speed and the scale of what the Chinese are doing is overwhelming. So if we don't pay attention, we will basically not survive that as well. So we will have the same situation as in solar. And so just not to make it too long, but one very important thing is, what do we need to do? We need to fast-track permitting. We have to give a huge pipeline of projects to our industries in the Baltic Sea, in the North Sea, on the French Atlantic coast, for the floating offshore wind in the Mediterranean. So we have to come up and align all that so that our industries, our equipment suppliers really can say, okay, we're going to build factories for that, for the transformers, for the cable laying vessels, etc., etc. Otherwise, if we continue just the way we have done, for 100% for sure, we won't get the offshore wind deployment targets reached. We will have much more Chinese equipment here, and we will lose out on every possible front, I'm afraid.
Thank you so much for that opinion. Sebastian, question to you. So in terms of recycling capacity, I know that Poland is trying really hard to sort of, improve the capacity for recycling. But if I remember correctly, when I was preparing for this panel, we reach around 12% of recycling, sort of, across Europe, and those numbers are not sort of rising. So what more can we do in terms of recycling capacity in Europe and in Poland?
Of course, we have to do our homework, right, to reach some goals which are specified on the EU level. However, we should not forget that we are developing our economy in a very deep dependency from our European partners. And also, if I look at the connections, now a bit troublesome because of the stagnation in Germany with the German industry, we should be concerned about the position of the Polish economy and the European economy in the globalization, right? And of course, what you describe here and what we are talking here about can easily fall under the umbrella with a big inscription, polycrisis, right? So we cannot just find one answer, one miracle measure against this crisis. If I'm trying to look for a good metaphor and big picture to bring all these problems together, maybe Danny Roderick with his globalization paradox is a good person to explain that. Because Danny Roderick brought into debate now a kind of revised paradox. It's not anymore hyper-globalization, democracy and sovereignty, but climate change, but I understand under this also our technological change, the condition of the middle class in developed economy, so I understand through that the condition of the European middle class in general. And the third corner is the fight against global poverty. And we cannot really have more than two of these points. So we have a choice how to move on. If we give up the green transition, probably in a couple of decades our economies will collapse. If we say, okay, we don't care about the condition of the global south, our world will also be in danger. So what's the answer of Danny Roderick? And actually you brought these two answers on the example. So first, deals with countries which dispose of resources that might be interesting for us, and countries which decisions may impact efficiency of the green transition. So it means we transfer our fiscal capacities to some extent, very difficult if you look at the conditions of the European economies, but also technologies. And the second point, we should keep our markets open to these countries. If not, we will see globalization turning into slowbalization and then probably into deglobalization. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that point. Sergey, so should we be worried about our climate net zero targets in terms of energy transition and with this sort of, the current global situation? Should we revise them? Should we be a little bit more careful about them? Or what can we we are still optimistic in terms of reaching them?
I don't think being worried is a good strategy in politics. But we should be aware of the challenges. look, we have, of course, now with the hearings of the commissioners and with the debate about the new commission and the new targets and the new policies, it's an important point in time here. And I think that Madam von der Leyen is very clear on that. And I hope she will remain clear that the targets will remain. Why? Because it's a business issue. It's a certainty for our businesses and for our companies. We cannot say to companies during one parliamentary term, the target is 2030, and during the next parliamentary term, the target is 2035. And yes, some of the businesses will be having troubles because they didn't take care of it on time, like the Volkswagen in Germany. Well, but we cannot adjust our pace to the failures of the individual businesses. They should have done it before. We can talk about subsidies, about how to soften the issue, but we cannot adjust the motor in Europe, the engine in Europe, depending on the failures of management of certain companies. So from that perspective, the targets must remain. The targets must be clear. The question is, how do we get there? And this is where the Draghi report, I think, is very good. With all the different criticism and critique that you can imagine, the 2 points that are important there, and I think the main point there, and this is where I agree. Everyone is talking about this report and saying it's about deregulate. We have to deregulate. Well, this is actually not the core of the report. The core of this report is to be more strategic and to be more generous in terms of our investment. These are the 2 points. Everything else is distraction. People who don't want to invest more, like the liberals in Germany, or some German governmental people, they would like to refocus on regulation issues. But this is not the main point about Draghi report. The main point is, if we want to catch up, we need to invest much, much more, also with our own resources, maybe on the European Union level. And we must invest strategically. Not everywhere, but look where we still have an opportunity. For example, if it's an AI, then it's maybe not the big language models, but this is AI and industry, greening industries, where we still have an opportunity as opposed to many other sectors of the industry. These are our opportunities, but we will only be able to catch up if we invest more. And then it's not the matter of targets. It's the matter of the way to those targets. Infrastructure and new technologies, green technologies, this is our chance, but we have to do our homework.
Do you think technological neutrality might play a crucial role in that, what you just said?
Technological neutrality, depending on what you mean. If there are some people who are saying, let's talk about e-fuels, is this what you mean, and not just focus on one particular technology like electromobility? Well, we don't insist that this should be just motors and engines only. It can also be, in certain sectors of economy and of traffic, it can also be hydrogen. But it should make sense. And the problem is that e-fuels do not make sense in terms of the output and input. And if we want to get the target right, then let's talk about it pragmatically, but let's not have some illusions in terms of hydrogen issues. Yes, this could be a good complementary technology. In terms of e-fuels, we're not sure about that.
Thank you. Monica, so the question for you, we always speak about Europe as a sort of, the entity, united entity, but there are huge differences in terms of carbon-intensive economies across Europe. So do you think we should tackle the problem of key resources and sort of dependencies or interdependencies differently in different sort of countries, like Poland versus Sweden, for example? The carbon intensity in those two economies is quite different. So how can we sort of tackle that issue, if at all?
Well, yeah, of course, some countries are better endowed if it comes to natural resources and and previous decisions as well, like we have legacy decisions. Some countries invested heavily in technologies that we don't have now. But that's history. I mean, we can't do anything about it now. What we can do is looking to the future, and we have to. Each country is doing the same thing, really, looking at the possible future scenarios for energy transition and choosing the most economically advantageous path given the targets. And that's what everybody's doing. I think Poland actually has a clear-cut job. I mean, we just, in many ways, we have it easier because all investments here are certain that they're going to happen because they need to happen to replace our fossil fuels, our fossil generation. So in many ways, investors looking at Poland see this is an opportunity because it's clear what has to be done. In countries like Finland, Sweden, that's going to be difficult now because the prices are getting too low on the wholesale market. It's very difficult for investors to find a business case. So you have to look at it from different perspectives. And I think also building on what has been said, before at the Ministerial panel, we need to work a lot on interconnectivity around Europe. So interconnectors, building a really interconnected pan-European market will help everybody because we'll spread the resources that we have more equally around Europe. We've said a lot about Scandinavia being the battery for Europe. It's not as easy like that, but it is a question of efficiency, and I want to maybe spend 1 minute on efficiency and operation efficiency because we are talking all about investments, but we also have to be efficient how these investments are then operated and how these investments are put to best use. And looking at Germany, for example, the fact that Germany still has one single price zone within its national borders is hampering this efficiency very much. So we need to go deeper and not only look at the long-term targets, but also how, and it has been said before, how to get there most efficiently, how to get there that we, minimize the cost, maximize the benefits, textbook sort of thinking, but we don't have enough of this textbook thinking sometimes in Europe, I think.
Thank you very much. We have literally 1 minute for a question from the audience.
Rafa Libera, thank you very much for an interesting conversation. I had two interrelated questions. First one is, if you rely so heavily on technology from outside EU, like because, for example, components or the end products are much cheaper in China or another country, how can you ensure that you actually drive technological progress here in Europe when you have effectively importing the end product that's already been built, designed somewhere else? And secondly, regarding minerals and the shortages that are currently expected, and for example, we're talking about interconnectors, when it comes to copper availability, there are shortages, therefore high voltage cables, subsea, need to have aluminium in them. Do you see in the next 5-10 years significant investment in Europe in mineral, not only refining and processing, but also actual mining and production of mining minerals?
Anyone would like to answer?
Very quickly on the mineral side, there is some potential. Copper, for example, obviously in Bulgaria and Spain. Poland is the biggest copper producer of Europe, and I think we should be all happy and proud about that. Now, the key will be, as everywhere else, fast-track permitting. If we have permitting processes that are the way they used to be, with a lot of uncertainty, with years and claims and whatever, it's not going to happen. Otherwise, it could work. But the economics are not that good. Let's face that. Why that? Because, again, the Chinese bring the prices up and down when they so decide. And because the scale of production in Europe will never match the fantastic copper plays that we have in the sub-Saharan African copper belt, or that we have in Chile, for example, you know? So we have to be mindful of that. But what we can do best in Europe, our homework is to fast-track the permitting and ease all these procedures.
Sebastian, just the last 30 seconds, the last comment, please.
Okay, so there are certain competitiveness profile. Americans make progress with market. China with market plus state. And this is the way to create radical innovations. Europe is prone to produce incremental innovations. Now we have to answer the question, which way is better for us to keep up with the most important competitors? The Chinese way, more state, more regulation, more intervention, or deregulation and American way?
Guys, thank you very much for educating us today. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Okay, so we are online and we are ready for another discussion, and that would be a high-level conversation. One, the state of Russian economy post-2022 and its implication on energy markets. The moderator would be Hedley Gamble. Once again, big applause for her.
Good morning, everybody, and once again, welcome, of course, to the Warsaw Security Forum. My name is Hadley Gamble. I am the Chief International Anchor for Al Arabiya, as well as a contributor to Semaphore. I am very excited to be sitting next to this gentleman. He's the former Prime Minister of Russia. He held that position from 2000 to 2004. Prime Minister, as we just discussed, I was in Moscow 3 days ago, and I interviewed the Deputy PM, Alexander Novak. We talked about the state of Russia's economy today. We talked about what the impact could potentially be of a sustained period of lower energy prices on the Russian economy. He assured me that the relationship with OPEC Plus was solid and would continue, at least through the agreements of 2025 and possibly beyond. And he also told me that Russia can exist at any price. Was that a lie?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for introduction. I think he is right that Russia can exist with any oil price, but not Putin's regime. That's a completely different story. And this vice prime minister who described to you this situation, he simply lives in a totalitarian regime. He cannot say anything just what is contrary to the major position of the president. That's why just all this information which you get from them, it's absolutely inaccurate. The issue is that, talking about economy in general, as of 2021, Russia mostly the economic model based on export of raw material, mostly energy, oil and gas, and it was just $500 billion US dollar of export. That is a little bit more than a quarter of GDP, of Russia's GDP. And of course, mainly that's oil and gas. And during that period of time, Russia enjoyed these relations with the European Union. And the European Union was a major trading partner. 50% of Russian trade is European Union. And 75% of direct investment into Russia, it was European Union. Right now, completely different story. Talking about oil, of course, Russia very much dependent on oil right now, on export of oil. In 2022, when full-scale invasion of Ukraine happened, you remember just decisions of imposing sanctions. It was gradual, step by step, but there was already energy crisis appeared because of not immediate decision-making process. And you remember what prices were for oil and gas here in Europe. What is inflation was as a result of that. And during 2022, Putin got a lot of additional foreign exchange inflow, additional revenue to the budget. Much more. People didn't, Putin and his team even didn't expect this. And they managed to use this to invest to the military production. And Putin managed during last year to transfer economy on a military, on a war footing. Right now, Russia, this 2024, will produce 4.5 million artillery shells, while United States and EU can produce 1.3 million only. He has advantage on the battlefield. Coming back to energy, completely different story happened with the gas. Russia exported to European Union, that was major market, 140 billion cubic meters of natural gas, mostly by pipes. And in fact, after Putin's declining in July 2022, so he stopped exporting, just making a blackmailing on Europe just before coming to winter, and that's what happened. And then during short period of time, European Union and Germany in particular, it was amazing how just within 1 year, just Europe managed to survive without Russian gas at all, completely. And right now, Putin doesn't know what to do with natural gas. It's a big, big problem. Last year, Gazprom has a loss of $7 billion while just during 25 years, there was absolute profit. Yeah. And a huge profit, $15 billion per year after just paying all taxes. And now Gazprom in a difficult situation. But that alternative was China. Putin wanted to switch all the supply of energy, of gas in particular, to China. It's not possible. The so-called Power Siberia Project 1, with the maximum capacity of 38 billion cubic meters of natural gas. Right now, it's only in the level of 2025, but Power Siberia Project 2 is not in reality at all. China is reluctant to accept this. They continue to negotiate, asking
they're trying to get the best deal.
Absolutely.
They're working to get the best
Absolutely.
For China.
They know that Russia is dependent on China right now. And Chinese just, the horizon of their thinking, it's not 5 years, not 10 years, that's not a decade, it's 100 years. And they quietly pressing Putin. Yeah. China needs weak Russia with Putin. China doesn't want to destroy Ukraine, but China doesn't want Putin to disappear, because just weak Putin's Russia, that's what China needs.
In spite of that, though, the IMF has suggested that Russia is the fastest growing of the advanced economies. This year, they did grow last year, and there's projections that they'll grow in the year ahead, as well as what Alexander Novak told me just 2 days ago, which is that when it comes to revenues from oil production, that now accounts for 30%, not 50% of their state budget, which would seem to suggest that they have diversified.
Oh, it's not diversified. Of course, it changes. In 21, that was 45, almost 50% of federal budget revenue of oil and gas export. Right now, there's much lower. It's around 30%. And they're expecting, of course, a reduction of oil price. And we're expecting December, when OPEC Plus should reconsider their decision of reduction of producing and exporting. And Saudis already said just they're prepared to bring back some same volumes they had before. it would mean that decrease of international oil price, it's inevitable.
And that combined with the sanctions that the Russians are already facing. If OPEC Plus, if Saudi Arabia were to decide to flood the market, can Russia survive that?
That's an interesting story. Just bringing the bridge, taking the bridge for other question, which I would like to mention a little bit later. Right now, just we see also slowdown in the development of Chinese economy, and the consumption of oil also is reduced. That's why just there are a number of factors which suggest that oil price would be lower. Right now, it's not already 85. I'm talking about Brent. That's already around 70. It means Russian price for Russian euros that's around 60. That is comparable with the cap, price cap established by G7. With these, they already facing the problem because just Russian budget built up on the expectation of 70 of Russian oil. They're already running with the deficit this year. They already will start in October. Will start financing through the fund.
So essentially, their partners in OPEC Plus could do more damage than Western-backed sanctions.
Yeah, that's what. If the price stays here and runs with this and maybe lower, in this case, that would be a problem. Another problem is, of course, military expenditure, which is growing and growing. And for next the year 2025, the already just projection of the budget is another 27% increase. Of course, we deduct inflation like it is 10%, but still, it is quite huge. That's already 33% of the whole expenditure of Russian budget will be military, keeping the war.
6.3% of GDP. Yep. Is it sustainable?
6.3% of GDP, that's huge, but not catastrophe. Look at Israel. Israel lives with this 5% expenditure of GDP for the whole life. It is sustainable, that he can sustain. But the issue is...
But unlike in Israel, he's not getting a massive amount of funds from the United States.
Yes, but let's see just on the future development. Let's have a look. Well, let's have a look just on the let's come back to the green transition for European Union. European Union suffers a lot without Russian gas because European Union and others don't want to finance Putin's machine, war. But if Putin disappears and other Russia appears, that will be absolute great cheap resource for European Union to fund and to have this transition fuel, I mean gas. Infrastructure all exists. To build up infrastructure with China, it's a lot of investments. Infrastructure with the European Union exists. It could be easily restored. But the problem is Putin and his aggressive war against Ukraine. What we can do, a part of what we already mentioned about oil price, we should make a principled decision. The West should make a absolute principled announcement of the decision that Ukraine should win within 1 year.
So set a time.
How to achieve
a timeline.
Yeah, timer and decision should win. And how to achieve this? My answer is very simple. To increase support of Ukraine, to double support of Ukraine, to double military and financial. Ukraine is running out of human resources. Just people already tired there. In Russia too, but in Russia just, of course, human resource much bigger. Economy much bigger. War attrition, what Putin just now conduct, couldn't last long. Putin understands this because of the problem of oil price and international what's called market, of course. All those exports to India doesn't survive him because Indian central bank doesn't convert Indian rupees into any other currencies. China also reluctant already just of making funding different transactions because of secondary sanctions of the United States. That's what we have already, just a number of facts which could create a picture that Putin should worry about just near future. 1 year he sustained, but later on would be problem. To make Russia as a potential partner for the future, we need to deal with the problem of Putin. Problem with Putin, that's war in Ukraine. To stop war in Ukraine, we should double support of Ukraine. In this case, there will be not 0.3% of GDP military expenditure. Putin had to level up, just expenditure. That will be 15% of GDP. That is way to catastrophe.
In your mind, what is the timeline as things stand today? Because this is a man who's now said he's putting 27% towards military spending, and his economy minister is telling me that the price of oil doesn't matter.
If talking about just this aspect of oil price, which is crucial to Russia's budget and financial stability. If oil price continue to be 60, that's what already they were suffering a lot of, and the deficit will grow. But if oil price fall down even further on, it was last year, 2023, first quarter, when the price cap started to work, Russia's revenue, just price for the oil, was 43, and it was 50% drop of revenue. That already was an immediate issue of running with a huge deficit, and they have to devalue the currency. And later they devalue from 60 ruble per dollar down to 100. And now just the exchange rate, something like that. That means that it's very sensitive. And
how long can he continue to pay for this war? I guess
that's what I'm saying, just if two factors work simultaneously, necessity to increase further military expenditure and decrease of revenue coming into, just like for the price of $40 per barrel. It means just 1 year, just by the end of 2025, they have no resource. No external funding, no internal funding for deficit, and the budgetary reserve will exhaust.
Yeah. So in terms of the economics are that he's telling me everything's okay, we're growing, the IMF says we're growing.
IMF and Russian authorities and all others, we're looking to the actual figures. Calculating on the methodology of IMF, it's correct. That will be 3.5% of GDP growth. But the quality of this growth, that's military. You produce tanks today, tomorrow it disappears. It's nothing for the economy. That's simply figures. Putin just destroys future. He destroyed already sources of investment, as I said, natural gas, the export of this and something others. That's already just a problem. And now they already reducing the projection for next year. Projection for next year for GDP growth. It will be not already 3% at 1.5. And inflation would be much higher. And having a look at the new budget, that's what be the budget of next year, budget of inflation. Right now, the foodstuff inflation, that's 40%. Overall, around 9%, but foodstuff inflation, it's already 40%. People don't buy refrigerators and let's say cars every day, every year. Sorry, but they spend for foodstuff, for medical, for medicine, for communal services and transportation. And if you take these four, what is half of population only use as their expenditure, you will easily calculate inflation as 30%.
In the early days of the invasion, there was a lot of noise surrounding the impact both sanctions and the war essentially would have on the businesses of oligarchs. And there was a narrative in the West that these oligarchs are going to turn on him and that they will eject the president. That hasn't happened. In your mind, is that still a possibility?
No, that was an absolute mistake. That's why just sanctions didn't work properly. Only, as I mentioned, just the major sanction which targeted Putin's budget, oil price cap, was adopted only in December 2022, while other sanctions didn't bring anything as a pressure on Putin. Oligarchs, what those people who just for sanctions, they have no ability to influence on Putin. Even Putin's friends, those oligarchs who are Putin's friends, they have no ability to influence on him. They simply, I would say, trusted managers of one or another asset, industrial asset of Russia. They have no voice to say something to Putin. Putin is KGB agent, and he works on this mentality. Soviet KGB mentality.
What about the Russian
only few people
because
around
you were prime minister for 4 years, so what about the Russian people? If those closest to him have no way to influence him, and we're talking about a situation where his economic vision for Russia would fail, do the Russian people have a say in this?
Yeah. In my time, that was completely different Putin. And you remember what is at that time, I wouldn't just spend much time on that, but we had excellent relations with the European Union. We had excellent relations with the United States. I even publicly said that I dream my country will be full-fledged member of NATO. We had excellent relations with the European Union. We had a joint session of full set of Russian cabinet with the Commission, European Commission. And we just discussed on that time perspective. We announced us strategic partners. But 2005, 2006, 2007, Putin completely changed. He appeared to be as a real, not pretended to be a Democrat, but real person who he is now, KGB. Style Soviet person.
So the Russian people, you don't anticipate them able to push back?
Putin got his support as 52% once in the year 2000. We all believed in that time. He is an energetic young leader who could run Russia and bring Russia for the prosperity just without mistakes as President Yeltsin made, etc. And he got all support, and he had a great opportunity to bring Russia to a real democratic country, powerful but peaceful democratic country, part of European Union. Not necessarily European Union, but Europe and part of NATO. But later on, Putin made some kind of silent contract with the middle class mostly. You peoples make your money in Russia and spend whatever you want, I don't touch you at all. And but his requirement was, don't step in politics. And when we managed or wanted to start changing in 2010 presidential elections, just people were not prepared for that. They said, we're okay.
So your message then to President Zelensky and to Europe and to the United States, which is at this time at least still supporting the efforts in Ukraine, keep going, because beyond a year, you don't think that he can support this level of conflict? As in a year from now, it would be over. He would have to sue for peace.
My message is, and we have to touch the very important aspect of the current situation, US elections. If future administration continue to support Ukraine as a level as it does now, we have just the war forever. We need not to increase, we have to double. We have to understand who is Putin and just what the United States is capable. Right now, such countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, they spend 1% of GDP to support Ukraine. What's United States spending? 0.25%. It's twice less than it was in the Gulf War in 1991. It is much less than it was in the war in Vietnam, and I'm saying just in Korea. It's nothing for the United States. It is, of course, could be done by Germany and others. That's why just to double support, it is possible. It should be principled political decision.
Yeah. The issue there, of course, is that Donald Trump has repeatedly said he wants to put an end to the war and that Ukraine will not continue to be funded in the same way, even that it is now. And even Kamala Harris has suggested that perhaps that level of support would not be as it is today. What does that mean? Ukraine loses?
That is what is troubling me and troubling President Zelensky, I'm sure, and troubling just all Ukrainians, because just there is no visible way to get out. But and even in a conference like this, just people trying to compete each other with some kind of intellectual ways of settling the issue. There is no intellectual way of settling the war. Fight till the end. To do this, Ukraine has ability. They have their bravery. They have their resource. They have their experience. You should double this, and then just you can settle just all energy problem with the new Russia.
Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time and for joining us.
Thank you.
Energy security as the basis for just transition in post-industrial areas. That would be the topic of another panel discussion, and I believe the moderator is coming. It will be Michał Kurtyka, chair of the Energy Security and Climate Track for the Warsaw Security Forum, and we need to underline that the session is made in partnership with the Central European Initiative.
Okay, let's move forward with our next panel. Thank you very much for being with us, and let's penetrate the just transition and what are the pathways to transform our economies. So I will be very happy to be joined by Josh Fried from the Third Way. Josh, please welcome Josh with your applause. Thank you. My great pleasure to have Dan Poneman with me. Dan was US Secretary of Energy a couple of years ago, and we are friends and fellows at Atlantic Council. Dan, great to have you. My great pleasure also to have Georg Zachman from Bruegel, but also Green Deal Ukraine. We're working together on this subject as well. Georg, prominent European energy economist, great to have you with us. And I'm so happy that Reka could have joined us, Reka Seremeki. She's a former ambassador of Hungary to Washington, and right now one of the most active and engaged people organizing us in the Central Europe ahead of the challenges that we face. Thank you very much, Reka, for joining us. So, I'm so glad that you are here, and we had an excellent already introduction, lots of discussions, and we could have seen a historical perspective for European energy transition. We could have seen Russian implication, ministerial panel, a lot of issues were discussed. Now let's move to the practicalities. Whether it's feasible and where it's feasible, how to start the transition, what are the best places to tackle it. Josh.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. And it's been a fascinating conversation this morning because you've heard about a couple of key components of it. One is providing technology optionality, because what is practical, both on terms of cost, in terms of energy security, and in terms of reliability for one country may not be for another. And there needs to be the optionality so that countries that determine for heavy industry, for affordability, for security, that there is the desire, for example, for nuclear power, for the use of hydrogen, for the use of carbon capture with gas, that there is the ability to do that. The second key part is planning reform. As in the United States, Europe, the United Kingdom, we have a plague across advanced economies that it just takes far too long to build. So we talk about the need for the transition, we talk about the need for energy security, but we have not seen a willingness across any of our nations and across Europe to make the hard decisions to say that it needs to be moving quickly and we need to adjust regulatory systems that often haven't been updated, market systems that haven't been updated for the realities of the particularly post-Russian invasion of Ukraine, but even the transition to recognize the number of factors that come into why we need to build quickly and build all of the different types of resources, including transmission, that we need to.
Thank you very much. And what do you think in this regard is missing in Europe? You mentioned optionality. What we should probably stress more?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that are critical right now. One is the ability to start transforming how the markets are designed so that there can be more certainty in terms of investment, that it is able to come into what is needed where it's needed. I mean, we've talked a lot with the Polish government about their commitment, which we've seen across governments now, to modernize its energy system, both in terms of building nuclear power plants, large light water reactors, small modular reactors, renewables, and building the transmission that's needed. There is a lot of private capital that is available, but there needs to be more pathways to certainty so that they can invest in places like Poland where there is an opportunity for growth and have more confidence in the rate of return. And there needs to be a willingness, as the Draghi report laid out, to create more investment incentives and a recognition that there needs to be more of the kind of commitment to moving with the diversity of energy supply that's needed so that Europe can not just be more faster in terms of its transition to clean energy, but also recognize that there's the need for more ensuring that there is heavy industry that remains on the continent. And we haven't seen that in the previous European Parliament for understandable reasons, but it's time to start seeing that transition, as I think we've seen from von der Leyen's speech and from the Draghi report and other moves recently.
Thank you. Indeed, we have a lot of energy-intensive European industries right now being absorbed by Inflation Reduction Act subsidies in US. What would be your advice to Europeans in this regard?
Yeah. Look, I think one thing that happened is the reality of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law is that, for better and worse, the United States often is a very inward-looking country when we're developing policies, and it certainly does not feel that way in Europe. I was in Brussels soon after the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law, and there were a lot of questions about the implications of it within the World Trade Organization, within how could the United States act like this with such little regard or thought for the implications for European industry. The reality is it was unfortunately simply not taken into consideration. The United States is very much looking towards China and the competition that we face with China, the security threat we face with China, and the recognition that more needed to be done to enable United States industries to compete. I think in a way that suits Europe, both similar action needs to be taken here. There needs to be a little, there's the debate that is happening on additional public investment to create a more competitive playing field with China. And I think there also needs to be much more consideration of how do we enter into more transatlantic cooperation. So critical mineral buyers clubs, more compacts around specific sectors. We've tried, I think we need to try again to have some sort of trade deal around steel and aluminum so that we can start creating the kinds of partnerships between the United States and Europe that not only help accelerate the green transition, but also take into consideration that there is a common security interest against the threat of China in Russia. There's a willingness in the United States amongst both many mainstream Republicans as well as Democrats to do this. And I think we need to see both sides coming together and thinking about it, not just within the context of green energy and climate, but also really within the urgency of security and competing with just very heavily subsidized Chinese industries.
I think you also point to a very interesting switch in the way we see energy regulation. It's not anymore only technicalities regarding a given market, but it's very deeply rooted into geopolitics of today. And thank you very much for bringing this to the table. But let me come back a little bit to nuclear. Well, Poland is a country which engaged in a nuclear project, and it's a coal country. How would you marry both, Dan?
I think it's a natural marriage and a beneficial one. We're already working hard in the United States, Michal. And let me first thank you personally for your leadership in this field and the Warsaw Security Forum for hosting this great session. We have dual imperatives. We are in a race, and it's a sprint against the clock. The consequences of blowing past the 1.5 degree centigrade target of Paris, we're losing. And we're losing big, and we're losing now. And the consequences are evident every day. You don't need to read a bunch of scientific reports anymore. Therefore, for climate change reasons alone, it is imperative that we accelerate the transition away from coal. And, as you were just beginning to discuss with Josh, for national security reasons, it's important that we go to something that can be independent of an excessive dependence on countries like Russia and China. Nuclear fits the bill perfectly. We have found in the United States, apart from that little nuclear island, the nuclear steam supply system, the balance of plant, the transmission system, the workers who can support those things translate very smoothly from nuclear to coal. There's a company well known, founded by Bill Gates, TerraPower. They're building a project in Wyoming specifically on an old coal site. The United States Department of Energy has a major initiative to convert coal sites into nuclear sites. So I think as all of us in Europe and the United States look to this dual imperative of tackling on an urgent basis our climate challenge and tackling on an urgent basis the national security vulnerabilities that we face because of excessive dependence not only on the power systems coming from China and Russia, but the fuel that can choke off our economies at moments of critical national security crisis. We really need to accelerate that transition. I personally take my hat off to Poland for having taken a large initiative, and I think because of the strong links throughout Central Europe, this can actually be a role model for countries throughout the region.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dan, for providing us with this trajectory from coal to nuclear using the same transmission infrastructure, using a lot of existing assets already in a country like Poland, which is an industrial country. But let me be a little bit advocatus diaboli. People looking from outside the nuclear space are seeing a lot of different designs. You mentioned today TerraPower, but many people would be talking about NuScale if we have our Romanian friends with us, GE Hitachi design if we talk with our Orlen Synthos colleagues here, and many others. And people are a little bit lost because all these technologies in fact are trying to prevail and to develop arguments while the other is not good. And for the public opinion, I think what they hear is also nuclear is not good. So how would you answer this, and how do you overcome challenges linked with the fact that we have so many designs and still first of a kind we are unable somehow to make it run?
Excellent questions. I will answer them, Michal, in reverse order. Why nuclear? I cannot improve on the one-sentence definition by Bill Gates of the case for nuclear. It is the only carbon-free source of power that operates day or night in every season, almost anywhere in the world, that's been proved to operate successfully at large scale. And given the vertiginous increase in power demand everywhere, especially driven by AI, this is more important than ever. And given, you were talking about industrialization, the need to decarbonize not just power generation, but industrial processes and transportation. You know, if you fire up an EV with a coal-fired plant, you haven't really solved the problem. And some of these advanced designs, which I'll come to in a second, have high temperature steam that can be used to make plastic and other products. So the decarbonization of industrial processes, which is critical since power generation is only about a quarter of overall emissions, is imperative. Now, to this confusing kaleidoscope of designs, and I will be ecumenical and not advocate for anything here. I don't have a dog in that hunt in any event. But I think of this, Mikhail, as a little bit like the decade between 1900 and 1910 with automobiles. Some people might remember the Stanley steamer. There are a whole bunch. And what we need to have is a shakedown. We have to have a shakedown in this industry. It's a historic fact. In the 1950s, most, if not all, of these so-called new advanced nuclear technologies, molten salts, liquid metal, etc., they were being developed in the 1950s. But we had a president named Dwight Eisenhower who said, we're going in this strategic direction. And we had an admiral named Hyman Rickover who said, those are all very interesting designs, but I got to get going here. So we're going to pick the one that fits on a submarine. I'm going to call it a light water reactor. And then we built 90 on submarines and over 100 in our economy. So I'm not saying we have to go down to one, but we've got to get it down to a number that people can understand and make choices. And you can't have regulatory authorities approving 100 different designs. The system will clog up and get paralyzed. So I think rather rapidly from this moment, Mikhail, we need to have that kind of, if you will, shakedown cruise and down select. I don't think it has to go down to one or two, and I'll say why. Because there are some, like the ones that are light water based advanced reactors, which would include GE here in Poland, which include NuScale in Romania. They have a readier supply chain and could have an earlier deployment schedule. They also may not have some of the performance characteristics of the so-called Generation 4 reactors, which would be like TerraPower or X-Energy, so which are better for decarbonizing industries. So I think in the next 2 or 3 years, we need to shake down from the dozen or so that are really in play to maybe a handful that will actually get deployed. And there are people with expertise who can help guide the decision, and ultimately it will be decided not so much purely by governments. Governments will clearly have a role, but private capital will diligence these technologies, and the ones that are most economic, and you've got to be economic, are going to prevail.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for this vision, which is not only for energy but also for industry, and which is marrying very well the optionality discussion that we started with. So let's move right now to our distinguished European panelists. How do you see the challenges ahead of our European energy system? And Georg, and what is the recipe for a successful Europe in this increasingly complex geopolitical situation?
Also from me, many thanks for the invitation and for hosting that, Michael. Maybe I paint out a different vision, a vision that says, okay, we are moving beyond coal. That is pretty clear. We are doing that in different sectors. We are moving out of carbon emissions, and that means green steel, potentially based on electricity or hydrogen, cement, maybe with CCS, and parts of the chemical industry, then also with green ammonia. Now, the question that I'm asking myself is, where is this new fuel for these technologies coming from? And a lot of those sectors have a long history in Europe in coal basins, where initially energy was plentifully and cheaply available in the Ruhr area, in Silesia, and in several other regions. And we have, in the past, when we started to reduce coal consumption in Europe, Western Europe a bit earlier, Eastern Europe a bit later, started to provide them with alternative sources of fuel. So the Germans built them nuclear power plants in the 60s and 70s. Then at some moment they stopped because it became very expensive. Then as natural gas from Russia became cheaper, they jumped to that and brought it to these regions. So we always continued to maintain the existing industrial clusters because they were so valuable and had such a high also political power. Now, if we take the vision of a European Union that will be largely based on renewables, then the challenge is that those renewable energy resources are not necessarily easy to bring to those current energy-intensive regions. Which brings us to the question of just transition that was in the title of the session. And the question is, should we essentially fight that? Should we try to subsidize hydrogen, ask you all to pay a little extra for their heating in order to subsidize hydrogen for energy-intensive industries? Should we try anew to run a huge nuclear program in Europe that might deliver in 15 years, but even industry is not able to tell us what it is going to cost? Or should we say that some of the industries might just move where we already have very, very cheap electricity? In Sweden, for example, where electricity prices in Europe are among the lowest because they have abandoned onshore wind capabilities and legacy nuclear power plants that they continue to run because they didn't do things that my country chose to do. Finland, Southern Europe, north of Poland, there is abundant of cheap renewable resources available, and getting some of the energy-intensive parts of the value chain there would enable Europe to stay sovereign, to stay independent of imports from other parts of the world, would strengthen the internal market, and would allow us to competitively produce the high-value product still in the old regions and clusters of economic activity. But this requires that we don't fight against the new gravitation of the new economic geography, but rather try to embrace it and support the transition.
Thank you very, very much, Georg. So, if it is renewables, so tackling better the renewable potential, how would it marry with what we said, industrial basins? Yes, what would be your solution in this regard?
So we have these value chains that are very long and where the basis product is often globally traded, like ammonia or basic reduced iron, that is the energy-intensive pre-product that we can easily transport from one place to another. And if we are able to have, and I'm kind of caricaturing, as you understand, for the sake of the panel, if we are producing such green ammonia in Spain and then transport it to Ludwigshafen and use it there to run the chemical industry, Spain would gain from it. The ammonia would be cheap. We would maintain our strategic sovereignty, and Ludwigshafen would still be able to produce high value added chemical products. And that would essentially marry the industrial, keeping the value in Europe, leveraging the benefit of the internal market, and at the same time decarbonizing and keeping our industry alive.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Thank you for this. And Reka, let me ask you, how do you see energy security in an increasingly complex international environment?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the organizing of this panel. I could not agree more with what has been said before me, that it is such a highly important topic that I think we have to get engaged both internally in Europe and in a transatlantic framework. And I will tell you why. So one of the first things that I would like to highlight is just following up on a previous note that we heard, and I would like to second that we're really in a race against time. But that also means that what we are facing is a shift, or we have to understand that there is a shift in our stakeholder there has to be a shift in our stakeholder understanding and approach to this dilemma. Because although we do have, and companies as well as decision makers do have the traditional set of stakeholders in making their decisions, what we're facing now is exactly as you have mentioned, the frequency of the negative consequences of the climate change, as well as the intensity of these new developments. What they mean is that our real stakeholders is the society. So we do have to engage in a very serious way in a discussion on a societal level, because it is not about a particular group, but it's about our entire society, which I think is a shift in the stakeholder approach. But that brings me to a thought that I wanted to add on before as well on this Europe-US dynamics. And it is that I think the climate change understanding of the decisions towards shifting into a net zero economy, this showed a very interesting example of how Europe was kind of setting the tone in many ways to a lot of the American companies. This was a particular issue in which what we saw was that there was a political wrangling for some time between the European decision makers and American political decision makers, with all due respect for those who were understanding the importance of handling the climate change. But despite this political wrangling or debate on the two sides of the Atlantic, what we have seen from the beginning is that several of the US industries and companies were making, in fact, or implementing several decisions that related to their production that made them compatible to the European markets, without a political kind of blessing or without a political push even. So I think it's a very interesting dynamics in the Europe-US discussion that climate change provoked, or the ambition of the Europeans to shift into a net zero economy provoked in the industrial field. But what I would like to highlight is three short points, which I call the 3S words that are very important for this. One is the stakeholder and the society element that I said. The second is that what we have to see is that no one company can make obviously a difference, or no one industry can make a difference. So what we have to understand this in making our decisions is that it's a systemic change that we need to kind of focus on. So what we have to try to understand behind all our ambitions, for instance, what you said to create a level playing field with China, yes, we have to think about it systemically, and that requires a Europe-US fundamental strong cooperation. And I would go beyond. That requires a Europe-US plus partners, plus allies, plus like-minded decision makers kind of involvement. So it's a systemic approach, I think, that we have to aim at exactly to be able to create a level playing field. And the last S is that I would like to highlight in this is that I think there's a dilemma, of course, about how to handle change of going from a carbon heavy to a non-carbon heavy or less zero carbon economy. And of course the dilemma is always, how do you see the change? You have a phase of transitioning into a new era. At the same time you are transitioning out of an era. And of course, for investment decisions, for de-investing in certain areas, these two seem to be totally different kind of sets of decisions. And yes, they are different. We are transitioning out, we are transitioning in, but it's not necessarily a succession from one kind of era to another. Because what we will see, and I think primarily because of the rapid changes, is that this is almost a parallel process. We have to be transitioning out of certain industries and certain investment as much as we're transitioning into a new phase of industrial activities, and that's the kind of framework in which we are making decisions on, like I said, investments, on asset closure, on decommissioning, on divestments, and all of the kind of major decisions are part of this, because the impacts are very similar to our society and to our industry and corporate decision making. At the same time, also because they are simultaneous, the impacts are really impacting on. I mean, it's back and forth in most of the decisions that are being made. Shortly.
Thank you very much, Reka. Let me come back to geopolitics, if I may, because both you, George, you a little bit touched the subject also, Dan. Georg, you mentioned rather Spain and Germany in terms of cooperation rather than Germany and Louisiana, let's say. But nevertheless, the issue is on the table. I mean, we are increasingly alone as democracies and as like-minded countries. Between Europe and North America and allies. And we are facing an increasingly complex world. We have seen what happened in Lebanon this night as well. So there is a domino of events all across the globe, which is making this globe a more uncertain place. Is it a time the same way as we did after the Second World War? Or maybe after the oil crisis in '73, where International Energy Agency was born, is it a time for, let's say, a stronger partnership across the Atlantic? If yes, how it should be structured? If no, what is the alternative?
I'll take a stab at that. I think the answer is yes, and I think the obvious danger is evident to everyone in this room. I'm old enough to remember, maybe a few are, October 1973, and the shattering impact of OPEC on world oil markets. It took the United States from 1973, 40-ish years, to get back to the point where we're now the world's leading producer. We were lulled into a sense of false complacency by the easy, cheap fuel. And we're at risk of having this same, and now we've gotten over that, and now we have a much more democratized production, and we've had a huge surge in the U.S. And I'm reminded of what First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill said in converting the British Navy from coal to oil, that you find security through variety and variety alone. It is not going to be an answer for everybody to be self-sufficient in every energy resource, because province does not distribute geological resources evenly across the world. We're at risk of having the same problem erupt in advanced renewable energy because of the critical minerals that are distributed unevenly, and more critically, the processing thereof, which is being concentrated in places like China. And therefore, we would be foolish to make the same mistake. And I don't believe in reinventing the wheel needlessly. I believe that the invention of the International Energy Agency at that time was a good thing to do, and I have not been deeply engaged with them lately, but I would humbly submit to my colleagues to get their views on whether or not making sure that the IEA has a remit and a mandate that permits them to address the same kinds of diversification requirements and reinforcement of one another's vulnerabilities that the IEA has been so successful at implementing in the area of critical minerals. So as we do see a widespread deployment of renewables, we don't fall into the same complacency that allowed us to become subject in geostrategic leverage terms to excessive dependence on one or two countries that may not share our values and our interests.
Can I jump on this? Because I'm so glad you raised Danielle 1973. I think it's such an important moment, and I think it's very much part of the current dilemma or problems that we had with Russia's attack on Ukraine in Europe, which was not so much seen or understood in the U.S. And it is exactly going back to 1973, when, because of the oil crisis, what happened in the US was exactly as you said, but what happened in Europe was a need for diversification, and the Soviet energy imports appeared as the means of diversification for Europe. So our ties, our meaning Germany, France, Italy, ties going back to having a Russian import gas go back to 1973, Russian import oil go back to 1973, and it was a part of a diversification. So I would second absolutely what you say about variety is the only security, but I would say variety with or on the basis of like-minded countries, suppliers, and trade partners.
Yeah, and to build on both Dan and Reika's point, I think it's the combination of those two things and a recognition that we're still in many cases reliant on international organizations and processes that were born just after the Second World War and were really developed during the Cold War and an era of globalization. That era, unfortunately, appears to be over, and the entities that we had built are not purpose-built for an era of democracies competing against authoritarian states and dealing with climate change and what really has become the weaponization of energy, and looking at how we can expand on the role of IEA. There's been a proposal in the United States to create something equivalent to a clean energy Marshall Plan amongst like-minded countries around critical minerals, around financing, around building and trading more of the energy assets and innovation that Europe and the United States and countries like Japan and South Korea do so well, and also starting to figure out how we can coordinate in a coordinated fashion, export our technologies in an affordable way to the global south, because that is also where our values are competing against Russia and China. But right now we're not thinking of that strategically, and I think it's very dangerous in the short term and incredibly risky over the longer term.
Thank you, Josh. You bring a very interesting concept, clean energy Marshall Plan. That's very, very interesting. By the way, you know that 10% of the money which went to Europe for the Marshall Plan were spent actually on buying European oil at that time. That was so Marshall Plan had already a very interesting energy dimension at that time. We would probably turn it a little bit differently now, but doesn't. Georg, how do you see it?
Yeah, maybe let me pick up this Green Energy Marshall Plan. It's so far kind of still requires some more definition and clarity. So the nice thing about it is everybody can read into it what they like, which makes these concepts initially very useful and fruitful. The way I would like to frame it, and certainly some people would disagree, is I think it's a great idea. I think it's very useful to bring down the cost of capital for clean technology exports to the global south and other parts of the world. The main problem that I see in many of these countries is a lack of functioning markets that are able to refinance corresponding investments. And what I would see as the sort of silver bullet is tools that imply some conditionality on the development of regulatory frameworks in the countries that would essentially tell those countries you get access to corresponding finance if your market is not betraying past investors for a certain period of time. And that allows not only the money directly to flow from this Marshall Plan money, but it would also de-risk all other investors coming there significantly and bring down the cost. The challenge, of course, in the end will be kind of who is going to decide on the rules of that, and will the ones that decide on the rules prefer yellow or green electrons or whatever. So there is a lot of work to be done, but I think it's a very, very fruitful avenue for discussion across the OECD. And maybe one last point, if I may, I think from a European perspective, it needs to be highlighted. I think we have one tool that has been very efficient in decarbonization in Europe, which is carbon pricing. It has been able to set a ceiling with respect to the emission allowances that are offered for until we run out of those allowances. And as such, it is really a great commitment device of the state to be true to its promises. And if there would be any chance of discussing that with a future U.S. administration, and of course from a European perspective, that would be the best way forward to extend also the reach of not only carbon pricing but to the two continents, but even beyond.
I come back to this. You mentioned that it would be good to fuel bus factory, if I may remember correctly, with Spaniard green hydrogen, let's say. If I push a little bit this idea of green Marshall Plan or clean energy Marshall Plan beyond the north-south divide, but rather integrating transatlantic energy market, would it be okay for Europeans if we somehow brought our green hydrogen or green ammonia from Houston and not because probably that would be cheaper? Would it make sense, and under which conditions?
In my view, it would be part of the mix in Europe. I think that Europe would want to have a certain autonomy of its own, but it would also like to see diversified competition for such imports in order to get good prices and good supply security. And the US in the energy crisis has saved us with the lucky coincidence of the ramp up of the LNG exports. We shouldn't think those things without the US.
Thank you very, very much. That was an extremely interesting discussion, and I would like to thank you, my panelists, distinguished panelists, and I would like that we thank them all with our big applause. Thank you.
So that was really, really, really interesting when it comes to energy transition. We have geopolitics in play, but we'll go deeper into this topic because we'll get some spotlight on the WSF annual report. And now we have a time for a conversation about the role of the Weimar Triangle. This aligned vision of European energy security? That is the question that will be tackled with our speakers, and the moderator would be Hedley Gamble, international journalist and presenter. Big applause for her.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back once again. We're going to be talking about the role of the Weimar Triangle. And I think two people know better to talk about this than the ones that are joining me now, simply because we're going to be talking to a great extent about energy. And frankly, pragmatism, price,
and the feasibility of the path to decarbonization that so many in Europe are looking for. I'm excited to welcome them both. Markus Reichel is member of the Bundestag in Germany. Welcome, Markus. Adam Guibourget Chetverchinsky. Almost close, very, very close. He's the former Undersecretary of State for Climate and Environment here in Poland, and it's fantastic to have them both. Gentlemen, just before we kick off, I'd love to ask you to give us your assessment of the success achieved so far by Europe post-invasion of Ukraine in terms of managing the route to decarbonization while at the same time supplying the energy that is needed today.
Well, I think one of the first great success that one of the things that we managed to do in Europe and what we showed during this energy crisis in the context of the war is that we were actually pretty good at reacting quite fast to the changing situation. Usually discussions are known in Europe to be very lengthy, very thorough, but we were actually able in a matter of a few weeks, a couple of months, to implement very significant legislation in terms of, for instance, gas storage that enabled us in Europe to go through a safe winter. We were able to coordinate also at European level to provide help and support to Ukraine, and Poland did a lot to do that, providing help directly, but also acting as a logistical hub for that help to be given to Ukraine. And we were able to coordinate also on sanctions. I think we still can do more on all of these fronts, but I think overall, compared to what we imagine very often, the European machinery as being very inefficient and cumbersome, we've shown that that in these times of crisis we were able to work together quite well. And I think the only thing we can hope for is that we can show more of that combative spirit in future years, and also in normal times and on normal files.
So maintaining that level of dexterity.
Well, I think first 3 years ago, nobody would have thought that the EU will be able to react that way and that it will keep together, and we did so. Our internal market proved, all in all, well, and our institutions proved themselves. So I think this was a good experience for us as Europeans, but of course now we need to adapt to a totally different global outlook, and here we have to become faster, as you say, not only during an imminent crisis, but also in normal crisis days. Let's say it like that.
How do you do that during a period of high inflation and higher energy prices? How difficult is that? Because you're not only having to attempt to stay on path to decarbonize, but at the same time convince your citizens that taking home a bigger energy bill is in their better interest.
Well, in the short term, I think it was possible to convince at least the citizens that the government is able to level out the most important price hikes. I think we forgot a little bit about the businesses, and they had the real problems.
Certainly in Germany. Certainly in Germany.
Definitely, but all over Europe due to our internal connected energy market.
Yes, I think overall one of the things what we could observe during this crisis is that markets can regulate a lot of things naturally, but it's also difficult for some players, in particular households, in particular SMEs, to, for instance, fully hedge themselves against volatility on electricity prices. Even if some instruments are available, are they really available for everyone? And thinking about these consequences, the social impact of the policies that we implement is critical for their success. Because if not, these policies, rather than fueling emission reduction, will actually fuel populism and not real reductions.
And we're seeing that in some countries already in Europe.
Yes, of course, but this shows that governments must understand the laws of market economies. Yeah? And during the crisis, I think the laws of market economies were a little bit neglected because if there is no supply and governments say we will buy, for example, gas at any price, well, then the price will go to any price, in fact. And this is what we saw. I think what we definitely also for these, let's say, normal days now, we must reconsider what does market economy mean for us in climate protection, energy supply, and so on.
In the new normal, is there a single market for energy in your mind? For Europe?
Not yet. Not yet. I mean, we write it in this report. In order to create it, we need more than just an energy exchange, but we also need interconnections and so on. So there's still quite a lot to do.
Yeah. In your mind, it's a tough one because there is a lot to do, and it looks as if, unfortunately, this is a conflict that is going to continue. And earlier today, we heard from various ministers of energy about the need, obviously, to cut off the last remaining countries who are using Russian gas, to make sure that that comes to an end as quickly as possible, but also as painlessly as possible. And we know that the pain is going to be there either way. In moving to a single market, what is the greatest challenge in your mind to making that a reality?
Well, I think in terms of the functioning of the market, beyond the energy security question and the energy supply, we have huge challenges around the pricing of energy, not only to provide our economy or citizens with affordable and predictable energy, but also to make sure that we have the right incentives built in the system so that we see the investments that are necessary. Because we see a lot of investments in energy generation, but we also need zero-emission solutions to balance, for instance, renewables. We need to see more investments in grids and in energy storage in Europe. And I don't see that we have today, in the way the market functions, that we have the proper incentives for private companies to take on those investments, or at least we don't see those investments in the volumes that we would need for a properly functioning energy system that is fully decarbonized. And part of the answer to that, I believe, is in providing adequate financial remuneration for some of the services that are provided by these sources.
Yeah. What is Germany doing specifically? Because Germany hitherto has been the engine of European growth. When I spoke with Olaf Scholz in February of this year, I pushed him on the economy. He tried to tell me it was doing great, and of course we all know it isn't. What is the next step in your mind? Because obviously people look to Germany and Europe for many reasons, not the least of which to be a leader in this.
Well, Olaf Scholz also tells us that he is doing well, and I'm not yet. I'm not convinced yet. But one thing is for sure, because you asked what are the problems, why don't we realize specific solutions? I mean, it's always a question, do we want to lose control on the national level? I mean, we talk about the advantages of European Union. Yeah, there should be a defense union, there should be an energy union. Yes, that's clear. But now, are we ready to lose control on the national level? One thing. And the other thing is, of course, we need to communicate our energy and also climate protection policies to each other. We also highlighted this in this report. They have to be aligned or realigned. Otherwise, if Germany does one thing, France does the other, and Poland the next thing within the Weimar Triangle, then there are no synergies. And Germany at least should start again to communicate more with its neighbors in order to realign policies.
Yeah. Is it inevitable in your mind that Germany returns at some stage to nuclear energy in some form?
I think it is not probable at the moment, My political option says we want to have this technological openness to do so, but I think the society is not yet ready for it. But what I think we definitely must do is to get back to clear market economy rules in the main parts of the energy economy, and technological openness then will maybe open the discussion also for nuclear energy again.
I think that is clearly the Germany's decision what to do with their energy mix, as is every country's in Europe decision on what energy to invest. But I think it's important, as Markus was saying, that we will still discuss what our plans to transform our energy systems are, so that we coordinate, because we don't function in a vacuum. We actually are more and more integrated, and this is necessary for the good functioning of the system, to make sure that even if each of us are implementing these policies and choosing our own mix, that the goals are aligned, and that we know that everything will work together. And I personally believe that if we look on a large scale of the continent, for just the stability of the grid, we will need to have large zero-emission energy sources in different places in the continent. It doesn't mean that they have to be in every country. And today there is no really other option than nuclear to produce large quantities of decarbonized energy. And I think if we all accept that, and we are lucky that there are countries in Europe that want to invest in nuclear, then we can have a good functioning of the system. But that doesn't mean that every country has to do it, and every country can still continue to choose. But we, I think, need to agree at European level that yes, it will actually be good for all of us in Europe if some of us invest in nuclear.
The politics versus pragmatism aspect of all of this, and I think that's what you're trying to reference there. It's difficult for a lot of people to get their heads around this in the current environment, that investing in nuclear is probably the only way forward when you're talking about industrial capacity, and having enough energy to fund industry, which then funds jobs and then keeps economies moving. In Germany, it's very difficult, as you say, but you're not ruling out the possibility completely. You just need a change of party?
Well, no, but you mentioned pragmatism. Yeah, and I think this is now in our economic crisis now the word to go. Because as Europe, I mean, we have 7% of CO2 emissions. This is significant, but we will not solve the problem alone. We are only 15% of global GDP. So we should say goodbye to all those ideologies where we want to teach the world a lesson. We should prove it that it works. Yeah, and prove that we are able to provide energy without emission at a low price to our businesses and to our people. And I think this is what we should concentrate on. We have all the means at disposal, but we are much, much too bureaucratic in the European Union and in Germany anyway. Yeah. So this is the way to go, I think.
And all of this, of course, requires a massive amount of investment. And it's something that we've seen the United States doing last year, the Biden administration's IRA, laying the groundwork essentially for that path to decarbonization. The European Union's tried to do something similar. Where are we in that journey?
Well, I think that we've seen in the recent weeks, for instance, with the Draghi report, that the EU has now realized that it was not enough just to set objectives in terms of emission reduction to drive economic activity in Europe. And that actually there is quite a real risk that the main beneficiaries of our climate policy will not be European companies and European industries and European workers, but actually Chinese or maybe American in some areas. And that definitely we need to do more at European level to ensure the competitiveness of our industry. Part of this is what Marcus was mentioning about the energy system, and it's providing our industry with predictable and affordable electricity for our industry to remain competitive. It's also about competition rules. It's also about the way we design our policies in Europe. But one thing I want also to underline, obviously, from a Polish perspective in this discussion, it's important that we also keep in mind in these discussions that the choices we will make to reinforce the competitiveness of our industry do actually benefit industries across Europe, so as to continue to drive growth in different regions and to ensure a better cohesion of the European society.
Well, where are we? This year we in fact lost our solar industry to the US to a main extent. And this, even though there is a strategy, a European strategy, that we want to rebuild our solar industry again. And we did it due to the IRA on the one hand, and to our coasts in Germany and Europe on the other hand. And when I talked to business leaders in this industry, they said, well, yes, of course we could apply for subsidies from the European Union, but we have to prove first, for example, by proving that we talked to somebody, that we proved other locations in the US, and to explain what is the cost difference between there and here. So this would mean, I have my own enterprise, and this would mean I would tell to my client, please, just to show you how good I am, here you have 2 other offers, get them. I send them to my, in fact, competition. And this is exactly what we did in a very bureaucratic way. So we must become pragmatic and say it must be easy. I think get back, for example, to tax credits and so on and so on. There's a lot to do to make it easier. We are not the best anymore, and we are not. We have to become the best again, and we will only be able to do so if we become pragmatic again.
What about leadership? And I'm not talking just at the state level, I'm talking about the European level. Are the right people in charge to make this happen? Because as you say, this is about understanding the confluence of several different things. Obviously, industry, jobs, economy, versus being a politician. I mean, do you feel that people there are able to action what we're talking about? The people in Brussels?
I think there is a lot of expertise in the European Commission, and the Commission has shown on many files that it was able to deeply analyze and really prepare well thought through policies. However, if I had to make one caveat, I would say that very often it's you have to really bring in those discussions different perspectives, because the challenges that we face in different regions in Europe are going to be different. For instance, if I look at in our area of climate and energy policy, a huge challenge that we have in Poland will be decarbonization of heating of individual households. Because individual households in Europe consume 85% of the coal that is consumed by households in Europe. So basically, nobody else but these households in Poland are using coal. And these are very often the poorest households. So there is also a social problem beyond that. But if you don't take that perspective into account, you risk designing policies that are actually going to create huge social costs in Poland. And I fear that this is a bit what has happened with the ETS2 in Poland. That's why I hope that before the ETS2 actually enters into force, because it's not entered into force yet, we have a chance, say a second chance, to redesign it to better address those social impacts.
Yeah.
I could enter into a blame game, but I don't, even though I'm a member of an opposition party. But I would like to say that the leaders have the hell of a job to do at the moment. We are open societies in the EU, and we are, I would say, under attack. Yeah, that's for clear. And so it is very hard to find a consensus how to proceed. And I think the job to do is to convince ourselves as societies that the times are very serious. And so let's reconsider what made us strong once. And then maybe also our leaders will get, let's say, have the power again to also realize these things. I think this is all interconnected, and of course it's clear that, I mean, I saw it in Eastern Germany during the elections now that we had, that there's a strong force also of external narratives and propaganda, I would say, and we have to fight this as open societies. And so let's not blame the leaders at that moment, but be ready for these discussions internally.
Just speaking about that, in terms of there's leadership at home, there's looking at things internally, and then there's the external as well. And I wanted to get your assessment on this. In the early days of the invasion, obviously, Europe was looking for external sources of gas. They were looking for anything but Russia, and they looked to Qatar, they looked to the United States. In the United States, this has been used as an election issue as well. You know, you look at Europe, we've saved the day in Europe. We did it at perhaps extortionate prices, but we did it. The alternative view, certainly alternative, I was in Moscow a few weeks ago and spoke with the Alexander Novak, the former energy minister, and who is now a deputy prime minister, and he essentially accused all of the Americans of war profiteering. They said, look at how much money they've made off of Europe. In your mind, is there some accuracy to that assessment? Because certainly for gas companies in the United States, Europe is a great market, but they're doing it on their own terms. How do you shift that?
From a European perspective, gas prices have been higher in Europe than they are in the US. And usually when European companies are buying from the US, from their perspective, it's cheap because the gas is cheaper in the US. So they're actually making a good deal when buying gas. And that's the reason why they are buying this gas. But I think what is important in these efforts around the war in Ukraine is to continue to work together in the West to support Ukraine, both with the direct help, military and equipment that we provide, and also with the sanctions that we coordinate between ourselves. And this is something that, you know, I think as I said earlier in the discussion, we still could do more, but overall, I think we've been doing quite well in coordination between Europe and the US on this question.
I think there's quite some truth in that, of course, but we say if you point at somebody and say it's your fault, there always some fingers point back at me. Yeah? So this is the same here. It is our job as Europeans to make our systems resilient and to be prepared for that. Yeah? So of course the US had some profit out of that. They also helped a lot in the Ukraine, so I don't know what the balance of all this is. It does not matter. It is our job to make our energy system resilient, and not the US or Russia. Also, it's our job. And so we learned a lot, I hope, from these last 3 years.
Excellencies, it's great to have you here at the Warsaw Security Forum. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so that's it for the energy track at Warsaw Security Forum. Thank you very much for great discussions on energy transition, classical energy security. We'll go further with those talks, but now a short break. Thank you very much, Wojciech Jakubik, Energy Security Center. Thank you.